vision and that roadmap.
Another is the bike and pedestrian mobility plan.
People have been asking for the plan for a long time. In particular, bicycle enthusiasts were probably the most vocal.
The plan is really all for the people. If it's not for them, who's it for?
One thing we have to be cognizant of is not everyone can afford a car. We hope that the bicycle infrastructure that we need to develop in the state will provide that last mile. We'll close the gap between where transit is available.
It was critically important that we understand our ridership, understand the state, understand people who aren't using our system that might be.
Stakeholder interviews, going around the state, talking to key business leaders and other thought leaders.
We're working with the Rhode Island Department of Transportation to collect safety data.
A plan without data is a guess.
Lots of different types of strategies.
Making investments to make it easier to pay your fare. It's making bus stops more visible and friendly to use. It's making service frequent enough that you don't need to rely on a schedule to understand when your bus is coming.
Then bringing them to Rhode Islanders through a vetting process to determine which ones they got the most excited about and where they might best be employed in the state geographically.
You should read through the full bike mobility plan. It gives a lot of options for the community, so it doesn't dictate exactly which segments have to look exactly which way.
It does provide a roadmap for the state to look at improving its bicycle infrastructure, outlines a conceptual statewide greenway network that offers possibilities in economic development, enhancement of our existing towns and village centers.
And it gives some options for the best practices that we can take and engage in to develop these bike paths and biking routes.
It certainly is our hope and our recommendation that any community can at any time take a look at this plan and see a project and they can advocate for it to happen.
If you bring these projects to the point where they can be presented as part of grant applications, if you advocate for these projects, they will be likely to be more realistic projects and projects that communities can really get behind.
At the end of the day, if this is going to be successful, it's because it was a group effort and we all came together to figure this out.
Some of the worst things that have happened in our country about keeping people separate have happened because of transportation and infrastructure, where highways have gone through communities, highways have split communities, highways have been driven through places that black people lived in this country. That's hard to change. How do we think about infrastructure in a serious way that centers equity in the middle of the conversation?
It's critically important, and it is challenging. If you have segregation caused by, let's say, a discriminatory hiring policy, at least in theory, on paper, that policy could be changed overnight.
Right.
You can't change the location of a highway overnight. And so if it went, especially if it went by design, pathway that divided a white community from a black community or removed a racially minoritized neighborhood, which happened time and time again, north and south in this country. It's going to take a lot to address that. Again, this is an example of where many of the solutions will come from the local level. Our job is, first of all, to provide the resources, and secondly, to provide an expectation that the future decisions we make about where resources go promote and do not diminish equity. The history of transportation and justice are much more closely connected than people think. I know it's not the first area of policy you think of, maybe when you're thinking about civil rights, for example, but from Plessy versus Ferguson, which is about who got to sit where on a train, to the Montgomery bus boycott, the truth is they've never been separated.
Is that a role? Is there a role that the federal government has in sort of saying, here's how we look at this and here's how we fix it over time?
I think there is, and it's something that we've tried to make clear from the moment I came in this department. For example, if a community is trying to apply for a competitive grant for federal dollars that my department oversees, one of the things we expect to see is that the voices of underserved and overburdened people who had been impacted by that or would be impacted by it, that those voices are heard, that they're part of the decision-making process. At the end of the day, the voices of those who have been most excluded have to be in the lead in shaping solutions. And when they are, often the entire community is better off.
When I had to decide between a place like Rhode Island and going back to Boston, the fact that I didn't need a car was a huge motivator in choosing to stay here. It was always like a question of like, who's gonna pick Aya up or where we're gonna meet so it's more convenient for Aya. And eventually, it just was consistent. I was there, I was on time. No one ever really knew how I got there that day. I'm Aya Josiah Fidor. I'm the most mobile person without a car. Sometimes it would be a combination of a bus and then a walk, or whether I bike there. It was just this mystery that kept going around. People were like, oh, how'd you get that? Like, oh, don't worry about it. I just got here. Best part about being on my bike and walking and taking the bus is I meet people and I run into people that I already know, like, on a regular basis. Here in Rhode Island, you can use public transportation and be in all the areas that you haven't got a chance to get to, and they're so accessible. It's unfortunate because it's a whole aspect of the Rhode Island experience that I think a lot of people miss out on. They would just comment, like, I swear, like, I am the most mobile person without a car, because I would just be there. And that was something I just, at some point, started to be really, like, prideful of, because I knew how to get around and I knew that I could rely on the bus system, and it just is a lot more accessible than people think. I'm Aya Josiah Fidor, and this is my Grow Smart story.
It's pretty cool to be able to take something from visioning and community input all the way through to implementation in such a short time span.
To me, what the Great Streets Initiative means is making the most out of our public roads so that they're inviting to every resident, regardless of how it is that you get around, and also who you are.
Whether you're waiting for the bus, riding your bike with your children, whether you're 8 years old or 80 years old, we want everybody to feel safe and comfortable getting where they're going.
Traffic and speeding issues and street safety is a huge priority for most of the city. Folks really are excited for the changes that are coming.
We don't have a car, so we primarily walk everywhere, or we use our bikes to get around the city. This is going to be great for us to be able to bike together safely, especially with our daughter alongside us.
I feel safer because cars go crazy fast.
You notice the difference how stress-free it is to ride down Oney Street because you're just worrying about biking.
You can also experience the smells and the sounds of a city or wherever you are and wherever you're biking.
You're not worrying about any interactions with vehicles, and it makes it so convenient and stress-free to get from one area to the other. So we want to see more of that for sure.
What we're doing here in Providence is we're building our city and we're building our roads for people.
A great example of that is what's happening right here in the Jewelry District in the 195 area, where the city is making investments in the Clifford Street bike lanes, the pedestrian bridge that everybody loves. All of that is critical to making sure, again, that we're supplying that place and those characteristics that these businesses and developers are seeking when they're investing in our city. The whole process took about a year to a year and a half. This project started out with a fairly robust public engagement initiative.
So we went door to door in many different neighborhoods all across the city, and now we are engaging folks with our new mobile community engagement setup, asking people how they think Providence was, what it is now, and what it will be in the future.
We held 12 different neighborhood charrettes where we had community members come in and we wanted to hear from them. We took all that feedback, put together a draft plan, released that to the public, took public comment again. We had a great interactive online map where community members could offer additional feedback if they couldn't come in person. And then we wrapped things up back in June.
My advice to any city that's interested in this work but just doesn't know exactly where to start is, you can start slow. So you don't have to go from 0 to 100 all the way. There are many easy steps that you can take to get this going. Once you get going, I guarantee you that you're going to look for the next progressive step that you can take.
But I have a big file of related stuff. For example, I have a whole pile of train and bus schedules because my friends sometimes call me and say, Barry, you know this stuff. What bus goes here and there? I'm a New York City kid, so transit comes with living in New York. At the University of California at Davis, I learned about bicycling, the power of bicycling to get around, to have fun, to connect to the environment. But I also learned that it didn't happen by accident. And they planned, and the city of Davis went along with it. And I see transportation as the key to so many other issues: environment, urban revitalization, equity, historic preservation, quality of life. It connects to all those things. And GrowSmart gets that. The early issues that I got involved with was an attempt to build an interstate highway from Providence to Hartford. But I saw this from the point of view of environment as something that would hurt the whole state, especially as the Situate watershed. There was a time when the commuter rail to Boston was discontinued from Providence, and we protested that. We tried to keep it, but we lost that for a while. Now we see the connection, the train connection to Boston, as being really important for Rhode Island, because we certainly want electric trains more than diesel. And that's very important now in the climate change. When Ronald Reagan was president, he basically canceled it, and we had to start all over again. It's one of the ongoing issues that I'm still working on. I had read about bike racks in, originally I read about them in Seattle and Phoenix, but there were a few other places. And I want to give a shout out to Mark Therian, who was the RIPTA planner, who saw the potential of it. Every time I see a bus with a bike on it, I feel, hey, you know, it was worthwhile. To some extent, Rhode Islanders with cars see the bus system as a system just for the poor or the people who physically can't drive, but they won't use it themselves. I'm still working on ways to try to get more use so that RIPTA plays a bigger role in all those issues: climate, land use, reversing urban decay. Bicycling is the most fun part of my advocacy. I was part of the movement to get the East Bay bike path built. That's the first one in Rhode Island. And we had plenty of opponents. Can't help but give a shout out to the people who just didn't give up in the face of opposition, like George Redmond and George Sisson, Bob Wagan. Keep advocating what you think is going to make things better, because you will succeed some of the time. It's definitely in my self-interest. And I believe it's in the self-interest of almost everybody.
Sankofa is a Ghanaian word which means to go back and fetch it. Translated into the English language, it means to return to your roots. We came up with the idea for the word when we were looking at the demographics of the neighborhood. So that was a pretty serious issue, where you had people who were from other countries who weren't able to access the foods that were native to their cultures.
And then we had all of this vacant land sitting there. That's just not healthy for anyone. From a safety perspective, from being able to make the community walkable.
I mean, traditionally you would look at a housing project and you would try to build as much housing. The fact that we're able to parcel off some of the land and really look at the green space, really look at providing a significant portion of the space to growing food and for people to be able to connect.
We are near 2 major bus routes, and they're both in walking distance. We went as high as we could without having to put elevators in, and we partnered with Groundworks Providence, and there's a tree nursery on the site. And then there's the whole gardening aspect. So it's about all of those aspects of community development, and smart growth fits right in there for us.
Sankofa is terrific. It's building 50 apartments for families in the neighborhood. It's also providing open space. It's taking back a blighted site and building housing on it, putting it back on the tax rolls. And then you have the garden and the market. And I think it's just a terrific combination of what it means to build community.
It is a model not only for the community, but also nationally, really looking at how do we create spaces that people feel proud of, but also that breathes life and people can grow.
Famous for her refusal to move to the back of a segregated bus, Rosa Parks became a symbol of American civil rights.
Rosa Parks, this is the mother of the movement.
Born in Tuskegee, Alabama, on February 4th, 1913, Rosa Parks became a member of the NAACP in 1943. Parks actively worked for voter registration and desegregation. But on December 1st, 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama, Parks sparked a national movement.
As an African American woman, she was relegated to the back of the bus. But the bus became crowded with white customers, and the bus driver demands that she moves even further back. And she and 3 other people were being asked to do this. And then he said, I'm going to call the police, basically. And the other 3 got up and moved back, and she refused, and the rest is history.
When Rosa Parks was asked whether she was tired that day, she said, I was not tired, and I was not old. I was only 42 years old. But what I was tired of was giving in.
Parks was arrested for violating city ordinances. After bailing her out of jail, NAACP President Edgar Nixon seized the opportunity and rallied an estimated 40,000 Black commuters for a citywide bus boycott.
People are watching what's happening in Montgomery. And 382 days later, on December 20th, 1956, Montgomery's buses are desegregated by the order of the Supreme Court. So part of it is the unity and the spirit that people maintained over more than a year of staying off the buses. Part of it is the galvanizing leadership of a very young Martin Luther King. So all of those kind of thrust the boycott before the country in a way that then provides an example of what is possible.
After the bus boycott, Parks and her husband both lost their jobs and were forced to move to Detroit, Michigan, where Parks worked as a seamstress, secretary, and board member for Planned Parenthood. In 1996, Parks earned the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
In 1999, Time magazine chose Rosa Parks as one of the 20 most influential people in the 20th century. And their comment was, by her simple act of protest, she galvanized a civil rights revolution.
On October 24, 2005, Rosa Parks died of natural causes at the age of 92. She became the first woman and second African American to lie in state at the Capitol Rotunda in Washington, D.C. In 2013, President Obama unveiled a statue in the Capitol building commemorating Parks' significance in history.
Rosa Parks was a badass. Rosa knew that this lady with these little glasses could represent something really extraordinary, that the average person, the one that you may not expect, could be the hero.
Rhode Island's best days are ahead of us. We're indeed going places. Speaking of which, expanding transportation choices? It takes a lot of work. Year-round, around the clock, research, advocacy, pushing through policy and process, like the Transit Master Plan, designed to make our transit system work better for everyone, now and into the future. So, you have a choice. You can get to work, or you can help GrowSmart RI continue to make it happen for all of us. Yeah, that sounds like the smarter choice.
Good morning and welcome to Let's Do It, Better Transit for Rhode Island Now. My name is Scott Wolf and I'm the Executive Director of GrowSmart Rhode Island. I'm going to be your program moderator for today's session. Our goal this morning is simple, but I would say also very important. And it's to better understand and act on what really is a once in a generation opportunity before us to create a public transportation system that is sufficiently robust and sufficiently integrated to help address many of the pressing challenges of our time: sustainable economic recovery and community revitalization, racial equity and fairness, expanding affordable housing and transportation choices, and fighting climate change. This is an opportunity that's created by an unusual conversion of catalytic forces. First, massive new federal funding for public transportation. Also, the recent adoption by the state of Rhode Island of a bold transit vision and master plan, an enhanced concern within the public about promoting public health and promoting racial and social equity. So I'm pleased to report, by the way, that for this very important discussion, we have a diverse and influential and very active audience with us to review all these exciting opportunities. So I want to go through a little exercise if you're up for a little interactive work here. I'd like all of you, so you can get a better appreciation of who you are, to take a moment now via the chat function to type in your name and your affiliation, and maybe why you're drawn to today's program. So why don't we take 20, 30 seconds for those of you so inclined to do that. And hopefully you are technologically advanced to figure that out. And I guess we're going to see that on the screen. Okay. All right. So we'll be recording today's session, by the way, and you'll be able to access it soon on our website's front page. And getting back to the chat function, we encourage your use of the chat function throughout this morning's program to offer your comments and observations. Also, use the chat for questions you'd like to ask during the discussion periods. Additionally, we invite you to use social media to post about what resonates with you this morning. When doing so, use the hashtag #GrowSmartTransit. And if you like what you hear today, we encourage you to support our nonprofit public interest organization by using the text to donate option on your screen. And finally, in this logistical portion of my remarks, I want to thank our outstanding sponsors today, the United Way of Rhode Island and Nelson Nygaard. Now I just want to set the stage a little bit more for today's gathering. Clearly, we're assembling at a time when the devastating COVID-19 pandemic is still battering us, but it may be receding shortly as the latest strain peaks and as we learn to better control and live with the virus overall. At the same time, there are these once-in-a-generation opportunities emerging to move the smart growth agenda forward, especially in the fields of public transportation, community revitalization, and strengthened infrastructure for smart economic development. The new federal funding streams for transportation and infrastructure are happening against a backdrop of increased demand for good parks, for revitalized main streets, and a healthier climate for the small businesses that populate those main streets, and increasing demand for bike and ped infrastructure. Also, we're seeing a heightened focus on confronting the unacceptable economic and health disparities among Rhode Islanders of different races and ethnic groups. Having a relatively new governor who is about to join us, taking a fresh look at Rhode Island's challenges and opportunities is also positive. Other causes for optimism include a more pro-smart growth Speaker of the House and a more pro-smart growth General Assembly, continued strong executive leadership of many of our municipalities, and a very responsive, influential, and smart growth-oriented congressional delegation. So as I see it, and I think as many of my colleagues see it, the stars are aligned, despite a lot of the challenges we face, for accelerated progress on a number of fronts, on transportation, on economic and community revitalization, and on climate issues that I know a lot of you tuning in today are very concerned about. For Grow Smart Rhode Island, there's several key priorities for us in the next few years. I just want to give you a brief snapshot of those. First, we're committed to ensure that the key phase 1 recommendation of the state's transit master plan are in fact implemented. along with the recommendation of the new state bike mobility plan for a doubling of state spending on bike and ped infrastructure. Secondly, we're primed to continue working with many others, including the governor and his team, to confront creatively Rhode Island's housing supply and affordability crisis and our state's related lack of population growth, although we did see a little uptick in that, fortunately, to save our congressional seat in the 2020 census. Another key focus of ours is to help people in economically disadvantaged neighborhoods develop more ability to influence their local land use and transportation decision-making processes. And these are processes that may seem a little bit obscure at times, but they can dramatically shape the future of the neighborhoods of Rhode Islanders. And then there's our push to insist that the once-in-a-generation infusion of federal funds be expended in a way that has lasting positive impact on our downtowns, our main streets, our public health, and in expanding transit and housing opportunities for our residents. Another Grow Smart Rhode Island priority is to devise and launch a new state initiative to provide more robust technical policy and marketing assistance to the many Main Street and downtown focused organizations throughout Rhode Island. And finally, we'll continue to lead the charge for financial carrots and sticks that shift development of major solar projects away from our prime forest and farmland. And simultaneously, we'll be seeking aggressive implementation of the Forest Conservation Act, which Governor McKee supported and signed into law within the last 8 or 9 months. So, speaking of the governor, I am now very pleased to welcome him to our forum today. He has been an excellent smart growth partner and leader, especially in the fields of improving public transportation and infrastructure, expanding Rhode Island's supply of sorely needed affordable housing, revitalizing our main streets, and advancing equity. And we thank the governor for his leadership most recently in calling for the engagement of all stakeholders before moving forward with investments in our transportation system's main hub in downtown Providence. Governor, I've been really impressed also by the way you've capitalized on, good morning to you, on your extensive state and local government experience, your cool demeanor, and your genuine interest in people and in good public policy. So welcome, Governor. Thank you very much for your sound leadership of our state and for being with us today in the midst of the Omicron surge, which hopefully is about to peak. So thank you very much, Governor, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Scott, and happy to be here with Grow Smart, United Way of Rhode Island, and RIPTA with Director Avedisian, former mayor. I'm a former mayor as well, and you're right. There's something to be said. Once a mayor, always a mayor, and your feet are on the ground in the local communities. And I think that's consistent with what Grow Smart's trying to do, is make sure we're taking advantage of all the opportunities of all 39 cities and towns. You're right. Just quickly on the COVID-19 issues and the current variant. The state of Rhode Island is doing what it should be doing. 175,000 tests last week, Scott, the highest in the per capita in the country. Two times the state that's in second place, 4 times Massachusetts. So we're doing what needs to be done to make sure that we keep people healthy as we come out of the pandemic. There's no time clock on this. It doesn't, there's no alarm bell that's at noontime and it's over. We gotta be very proactive and reactive where we need to be reactive, and we're doing that in a way that I believe that was positioned in Rhode Island in a big opportunity. And I think that some of the efforts that you're talking about here today, we're going to realize the fact that right now, besides really tackling the virus, and we're also positioned Rhode Island as like in the top tier of the economic recovery in the country. So where Moody's has got us like in 1st to 5th place over the last 6 months in the economic recovery. So what does that mean? That gives us this flexibility to move ahead. And we have this Rhode Island 2030 plan that I believe that Grow Smart has participated in. And we do have a transportation section in that Rhode Island 2030 plan. It's going to become embraced, I believe, by the entire state of Rhode Island on those critical issues that we need to talk about, which has to do with the economy and the blue economy and the green economy and transportation and you know, our education K through 12, whether it's a K through 12 or whether it's you know, has to do with higher education and advancing degrees and all those things, health and mental health and housing, as you mentioned as well. So we are at that point in time in Rhode Island where we have this tremendous opportunity to come out of a pandemic significantly stronger, positioned stronger than going into the pandemic. And as you mentioned, I did sign the Act on Climate as being a goal of reducing you know, the carbon tax footprint in Rhode Island with benchmarks in 2030, 40, and 50. And we have activated the core group of committees led by our new DM director, Terry Gray, and to really address that in a very aggressive way. Transportation is going to play a role in that. You know, as you know, and I'm learning that 80% of Rhode Islanders live within a 10-minute walk of a transit stop. Yet we only have 3% of Rhode Islanders using mass transit. I think that if we're intelligent about it and we address it in a way that can increase, and that only not create more convenience for the people who live in the state of Rhode Island, but it also helps us achieve the goal in terms of the Act on Climate and reducing the carbon footprint, the carbon emissions in the state. So I think that we're on board. We got a great director there at RIPTA with Scott to you know, to achieve goals that increase the ridership, and we're going to partner in with that with you know, RIPTA and Director Avedisian, along with other players that you know, really are interested in doing that, including our congressional leadership. You mentioned our congressional leaders. I can't get off a call or a speech or a talk in public without addressing the fact that Senator Reid, Senator Whitehouse, Congressman Cicilline, Congressman Langevin, they've been absolute champions for the state of Rhode Island, positioning us in a way and really advocating in Washington for resources that we can use here and leverage those resources in all the areas that we just talked about that'll be in that Rhode Island 2030 plan. So I would just say, and then you mentioned about the Kennedy Plaza. I thought that we had a good meeting in our office a few months back where I did encourage people, like you got to come together here if we're going to invest these dollars in a way that is going to make sense. And I believe that we have come together, and I think that we have a good framework of a strategy right now that we can go out as promised and you know, share that strategy with the people in the state of Rhode Island, in particular the ones that are, you know, directly impacted by an improvement of the Kennedy Plaza and the bus transportation hub in Providence. We did what was probably the most important thing back in October, was we made sure that the $30+ million was available for us, right? Because that was sunsetting, and as a new administration, we knew, and as a former mayor, we know that that you can't do anything without dollars. So I'm looking forward to, you know, showing that the Kennedy Plaza strategy, which will hopefully be a new plan that will be out, you know, for the public to see. And then I'm particularly hopeful that the people who have helped put together a strategy there are going to coalesce around that strategy, because that's the only way you get things done. If it's you know, if it's my way and the highway, or the highway, nothing's going to happen. If we can bring people together and find that common spot to address these issues, whether it's on the bike path strategies or the biking strategies or the mass transit strategies or RIPTA strategies and all the things that go along with it, we're positioned in Rhode Island to really do some very significant things. There's no need for Rhode Island to be in the first in and out, last out of these economic downturns. And part of the work that we do is make Rhode Island more livable. I love what you just said about a population growth strategy. I did that as a mayor in Cumberland. I had a 1% population growth strategy, and we're hopefully that we're going to be able to do an intentional population growth strategy to make our state stronger economically. And I'll end by just saying that one of the main goals that we're going to project, you know, while I'm governor, is increasing per capita income in the state of Rhode Island. So that we need to have strategies where we can increase people's incomes. And right now we do have challenges, and I'll just share that, and then I'll get out of the way here so you can get on with your business. But every chance I get to be able to talk with a group of people who are really interested in the state of Rhode Island, we do have some challenges. We need to reduce the amount of the need that's in our state. We have 350,000 people right now on Medicaid in the state of Rhode Island. 55% of our kids 18 and under are on Medicaid. That's not a long-term strategy for an economic vibrant state. And so we need to really be talking about ways in the immediacy right now, right, with short-term strategies and then long-term strategies. So I'd encourage everybody that's listening on this call to go to ri2030.com, ri2030.com, interactive site where you can actually, it's a draft that'll soon become a first edition of a plan for Rhode Island. And there's an interactive site there where you can actually put in your comments so that we can take input from the state of Rhode Island and then move in a direction that is going to be good for all people that live in all 39 cities and towns. So Scott, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for putting this together. And I do appreciate the opportunity to come in and introduce myself to people who might not have met me. My door is always open. Anything that's going to benefit our state, anything that's going to benefit our communities and the people who live in our communities, I'm on board with. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be here this morning.
Governor, thank you very much for your leadership, your authenticity, your hard work, and your commitment to trying to bring us together around a lot of these really important issues. And a lot of what you aim to do and do is exemplified in this 2030 process that you and your team put together. We've been happy to be part of. We're going to bring in your transit agency CEO, who you mentioned, Scott Avedisian, and really the implementation of the ambitious plans that we're seeing laid out today will largely happen because of the leadership both of you, Governor, and of Scott. So as I introduce Scott, I want to stress that he's been a longtime champion of community revitalization and of expanding affordable transportation choices for all Rhode Islanders, both in his current role as RIPTA CEO and in his long tenure, very successful tenure as mayor of Warwick. And while we believe that RIPTA has great new potential to move Rhode Island and its people forward, we've long believed that our transit agency is well run, with talented professionals, keeping the buses moving efficiently despite extremely limited resources. RIPTA has also been a model for how public agencies can and should engage with public stakeholders and patrons. And with Congress recently passing the largest federal investment in transit ever, there's very good reason to believe that we'll see major parts of the state's transit vision and master plan implemented over the next few years. So Scott, thanks for your ongoing leadership and close partnership with Grow Smart Rhode Island, and please take it away.
Sure. Thank you, Scott. It's a pleasure to join the governor today. And Governor, thanks for your wonderful support of RIPTA and your vision for where we need to go and what we need to do. But these are exciting times. Transit Forward Rhode Island 2040 represents a once in a lifetime opportunity to substantively improve transit in Rhode Island, but in a coordinated way that gets people out of their cars and making smarter choices to combat congestion and climate change. So adopted last year, this plan sets out an aggressive set of projects focusing on improved transit services across the state, but supplemented by smart capital investments focused on adding value to the transit riders' experience. Now is the right time for these investments. And as the governor mentioned, we have historic federal investment through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We have a swell of funding from COVID pandemic, CARES Act and American Rescue Plan Act. And we have an imminent federal reauthorization of transit programs that's currently being worked on in Congress, which is expected to not only grow transit investments, but to also create new opportunities for how transit agencies use our federal funds. So not only is RIPTA leading the charge to improve transit in Rhode Island, but we're leading the state's efforts to decarbonize. Currently, more than 90% of all of our electricity comes from clean sources here at RIPTA. RIPTA is currently piloting 3 electric buses. We have 14 more arriving this year. And by the end of 2022, 1 in every 5 RIPTA riders will be riding on electric buses. So 20% of all of our passengers will be on an electric bus. And we are now working on a program to fully electrify the Middletown operational facility so that Aquidneck Island will have nothing but electric buses. And let me just close by telling you that in December of 2020, we were moving about 500,000. We moved about 500,000 people. A year later, our numbers are back up to over 800,000 people. So you can see the number of transit-dependent Rhode Islanders who rely on RIPTA to get to work, to school, and to places that they need to go. And our goal is to recover the rest of the ridership that we lost during the pandemic, expand ridership into the future, and be the best transit agency that we can be.
Scott, thank you very much for that vision and for your daily work to make that vision a reality. We are very committed to continuing to be very active partners with you, and excited about that whole venture. It's now my pleasure, keeping the morning program going, to introduce this morning's keynoter, Christopher Coes, who is currently the U.S. Department of Transportation's Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy, and a former senior staffer for Smart Growth America. Christopher's keynote today is entitled Closing the Racial Equity Gaps in Our Transportation System. I've been a longtime board member, by the way, of Smart Growth America. And in that position, I've been able to observe firsthand Christopher's outstanding policy strategy and advocacy efforts. During his tenure at Smart Growth America, he wore multiple hats, including being Smart Growth America's Vice President for Real Estate Policy. He also was the Deputy Director of a subsidiary of Smart Growth America called Transportation for America, and the director of another unit of Smart Growth America, a national association of smart growth-oriented developers known as Locus. These demanding posts have given Christopher a keen understanding of how smart growth ideas and policies can actually be implemented in the trenches. And you combine that valuable perspective he's obtained with his keen intellect, his strategic savvy, and his natural eloquence, some of which I think was inherited maybe from his father being a preacher. And you have a very effective change agent for a more impactful and equitable transportation system. Christopher, by the way, is no stranger to Grow Smart Rhode Island. He's was our keynoter for our 2017 awards program, our 2018 Transit-Oriented Development Forum, and more recently has been an advisor to the Newport Health Equity Zone on how to achieve equitable development in Newport's North End. Beyond Christopher's major career accomplishments, he also has an impressive educational background with both a public administration BA and master's from St. John's University. He's additionally been a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and a professor at George Washington University. So my friend, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Coes, it's a pleasure to welcome you back to Rhode Island, albeit virtually. We look forward to your insights and guidance today about how Rhode Island can work with you, with the U.S. Department of Transportation and the Federal Transit Administration to best leverage the opportunity for building an even better transit system to benefit our residents and our visitors. And we look forward to having some Q&A with you and our audience after your remarks. Welcome again. The floor is yours. We're pleased to have you with us, Christopher.
Good morning, Scott. Good morning, Grow Smart Rhode Island, and to those who are gathered today as part of this great conference. Again, thank you for the invitation to talk about the bipartisan infrastructure deal. It's great to be with you virtually, but as you know, both my wife and I love coming to Rhode Island, so I will definitely, once this pandemic subsides, we'll definitely be visiting you guys soon. And as I told John several days ago, I'm still waiting on my pie for my colleagues in Newport. So again, it's nothing like coming back to great friends and great advocates who have been on the front lines, really trying to create great livable communities, and great to hear the governor, but also just want to commend the congressional delegation from Rhode Island who have been great partners of ours to not only get this bill across the finish line, but also we're working very closely on the implementation. Again, Scott, this is a historic moment. This is a major achievement for this country, and I think we should just recognize for what it is. As stated, Congress has passed one of the most ambitious investments in jobs and in infrastructure in our entire lifetime, but with bipartisan support. I want to stress from the offset that this is one critical part of the administration's plan to rebuild our country. We must and will pass the Build Back Better Act, which will invest not only in our families, but also in our communities. We believe that together, the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Build Back Better Act will create millions of paying jobs, make historic investments in equity, and fight against climate change and promote greater economic and physical resilience. But before we discuss some of the highlights of the bipartisan infrastructure law, let me touch on some of the strategic priorities that this department is pursuing over the next 5 years. Of our 5 strategic priorities for the next 5 years, we believe we must, and again, this is our North Star, we must make our transportation system safer for all people, whether motorized or non-motorized. We're going to be committed to working towards a future where transportation-related serious injuries and fatalities are eliminated. We believe we must grow in an inclusive and sustainable economy, and that means investing in our transportation system to provide American workers, businesses, reliable and efficient access to good-paying jobs, resources, and markets, including improving our supply chain. We also believe that it's our imperative and as part of our framework to reduce inequities. We will be striving to support and engage people and communities to promote safer and affordable and accessible multimodal access to communities of opportunity, services while reducing transportation-related disparities, particularly transportation costs, while also improving community livability and improving public health. Of course, as you know, this department, as well as this administration, believes it is imperative for us to tackle the climate crisis by ensuring that the transportation system plays a central role. And as you know, we recognize the important role that land use and transportation plays in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, as well as pollution. And we believe that's a huge priority for us. And of course, lastly, in terms of our last 2 priorities, we recognize that we must design our transportation system for the future. We will be looking to invest in purpose-driven research and innovation to not only meet the challenges that we are seeing today, but also modernize our transportation system for the future. That's more multimodal and serves everyone today and for the decades to come. And of course, as the Secretary has pointed out to us, we want to do this, particularly when we have this new investment, that we want to be able to make sure the Department of Transportation is a world-class organization and making sure that it's representative and its culture is suiting those priorities. Now, I know one of the topic of today's discussion is around equity. And so let me take a moment to discuss that. On the first day of this administration, the President Biden signed Executive Order 13985, advancing racial equity and the support for underserved communities through the federal government, which is calling for a whole of government approach to embed equity in our day-to-day practices. DOT has been committed to pursuing a comprehensive approach to advancing equity for all. As of now, we've convened a department-wide equity task force with over 160 career staff and over 30 senior officials to guide the work. Through this work, DOT is assessing whether and to what extent our programs and policies create systematic barriers to opportunities and benefits for people of color, underserved groups, particularly rural communities. These assessments will better equip us to develop policies, programs, guidances to deliver our resources and benefits more equitably to lead to better communities. Early efforts, I can tell you right now, have included introducing equity as a consideration to a number of our discretionary grants, strengthening our department's enforcement of Title VI of our Civil Rights Act of 1964, and also proposing equity for the first time as a department-wide strategic goal. We've laid a very strong foundation at this department, and the work will be ongoing. And one of the things I will say here is that we'll be hosting a number of public meetings, small roundtables, and other convenings, and I look forward to Grove, Rhode Island to be a partner in that conversation. Equity is a priority for this administration, and it's also a priority for this department, but it also intersects with two other key priorities of the department: safety, which is our number one priority and our North Star, and climate, which is also a core administration. These issues are intersect. We can't talk about climate if we don't talk about safety. We can't talk about safety and equity if we don't talk about climate. And with these things together, we recognize they can improve one another and improve our economies. In terms of the bipartisan infrastructure law, a once-in-a-generation investment in our infrastructure, which was signed back in November, it really presents the state of Rhode Island with an opportunity to advance these goals around equity, safety, and climate. There are a lot of exciting things and exciting opportunities, and I'll spend a few minutes highlighting some of them, and then we'll take some questions. One of the things I'm really excited about today is that this bipartisan infrastructure law puts significant dollars to repair and rebuild our roads and bridges with a focus on climate change, mitigation, resilience, and safety for all users, including cyclists and pedestrians. In Rhode Island alone, there are over 148 bridges and over 860 miles of highway in poor condition. Since 2011, commute times have increased by at least 10% in Rhode Island. And on average, each driver in Rhode Island pays $845 per year in costs due to driving on roads in need of major repair. This bipartisan legislation is the single largest dedicated investment in bridge since the construction of the interstate system. And with that, I am really excited to state that President Biden and Secretary Buttigieg today will announce nearly $27 billion to fund repairs and replace bridges in need. Based on the formula funding alone for the bridge program, Rhode Island should expect to receive over $1.7 billion over the next 5 years to support repairs on your highways and bridges. And on an annual basis, this is about a 15.5% increase of the previous authorization. Also, you should be aware that Rhode Island now is expected to be able to compete for another $12.5 billion in our competitive discretionary bridge program for economically significant bridges, and an additional $15 billion for mega projects. See, Rhode Island is also expecting to receive about $36 million over the next 5 years to reduce transportation-related emissions, in addition to another $41 million to promote resiliency in your own systems. Again, a historic moment that we're about to announce today. In addition to the major investments that we're seeing in bridge and road repairs, the bipartisan infrastructure law makes the largest investment in transit in U.S. history. Let me repeat. This infrastructure bill makes the largest investment in transit in U.S. history and the largest investment in passenger rail since the creation of Amtrak. Rhode Island specifically should expect about $292 million over the next 5 years in transit formula funding alone. Let's put that in perspective. That is a 38% increase over previous authorization levels. There are also going to be a number of new opportunities to invest in transit, like our new capital investment program, which has seen a significant plus up of about $8 billion guaranteed and additional $15 billion authorized. And I know we just had a discussion of RIPTA's own its efforts around its electrification of its bus system. Well, FTA's own low and no emission bus program has now seen a significant increase to about $5.6 billion over 5 years that will be able to support RIPTA's efforts to electrify their bus fleet. On top of all of this, this infrastructure bill includes another $1.75 billion for what is called All Station Accessibility Program, which will provide funding to upgrade existing stations to meet ADA accessibility standards. This isn't just about transportation. It's also about how do we improve our communities? How do we address racial equity? How do we improve environmental justice so that every American, every Rhode Island can live in healthy, vibrant communities? In Rhode Island, commuters take transit spend about 120% more of their time commuting, and non-white households are 2.4 times more likely to commute via transportation, which is what they should be able to do that, right? 81% of RIPTA riders don't have access to a private vehicle, which is their choice. And that is why we believe as administration that when public transportation is easy and affordable, that means fewer emissions, less congestion. But you all know at Grove, Rhode Island, and in the smart growth community, that also means when we are creating greater walkable and more transit accessible communities, we also have stronger and more vibrant economies. Look, on the rail side, this bipartisan infrastructure law includes over $66 billion over the baseline for passenger rail. $22 billion would be provided to Amtrak, another $24 billion for our federal-state partnership for the entire Northeast Corridor. On top of this, Rhode Island will be eligible for another $5 billion for rail improvement and safety grants, and an additional $3 billion for grade crossing safety improvements. On top of all of that, if you're not excited yet, we have many of our existing grant programs that support multimodal projects like Infra and RAISE have been expanded significantly. $15 billion now for a mega project program, which will now support multimodal, multi-jurisdictional projects of national and regional significance. Let me pivot a little bit because I know this crowd really enjoys talking about active transportation. The historic investments that we're seeing in our traditional modes is true in active transportation. A number of the investments within this bill will significantly increase walking, biking, and rolling accessibility. This bill includes $7.2 billion for the Transportation Alternatives Program, which supports pedestrian and bike infrastructure, including safe routes to school, recreational trails. This bill now, for the first time, includes $6 billion dedicated to local and tribal governments who want to make our streets safer, especially for people who want to walk, bike, and roll. Rhode Island can expect at least $36 million over the next 5 years, not only to reduce your transportation-related emissions through what is called our new carbon reduction program. And again, these dollars are able to be used for walking and biking. In addition to that, we have another $72 billion for our surface transportation block grants, which are flexible dollars that go through the state directly to MPOs and localities. And these resources will be able to support electric vehicle charging stations, vehicle-to-grid infrastructure, installation of intelligent transportation technologies, and so much more. One last program I want to highlight is this new program called Reconnecting Communities. And as many of you, and Scott, you're aware, I've been very intimate in a number of these projects across the country. This program will focus on legacy transportation infrastructure, whether it's highway or railroad, built through communities, and to rethink how can we reconnect them? How can we remove some of these infrastructure or repurpose these infrastructure barriers? Whether it's a highway, whether it's a railroad, how can we provide on a case by case? How can we work with community, listen to community, think about their economic or equitable redevelopment plans so that we can undo the harms from these past infrastructure investments? With that, I can just say it is an exciting time at the department, but we recognize we can't do this alone. We know we need the partners like the governor, the state DOT, the leadership at RIPTA, and folks like you, Scott, and the Grove, Rhode Island partners to work with us to make sure we can achieve the opportunities that are embedded in this bipartisan infrastructure law. And with that, I'll just say, we need your help. Let's get to work. And thank you again for the opportunity to be with you. And I'll definitely look forward to the questions.
Christopher, thank you so much. It's a lot to work with that this bill provides us, and with your explanation, a lot to get our arms around, but definitely an unprecedented opportunity of huge consequence. So there's some questions I have. There's some questions we're getting from the audience, and I think we have close to a half hour to go back and forth. So I know you're primed for that, right? So let me start with kind of a broad question. And that is around the fact that this is a massive amount of money that is being allocated for various kinds of transportation. And I think the governor and others in the state, certainly Grow Smart Rhode Island, want to make sure that this money leads to transformative improvements for transportation, for equity, for economic development, for neighborhood revitalization. How do we make that happen? And how does USDOT plan to help states and localities use this money in a really impactful, transformative way?
Thank you, Scott, for that question. That is a question that we get a lot. And I think over the last several weeks, or at least in the last month, I think we've laid out a couple of things that hopefully supports and give a really good guidepost of where we're headed. Our discretionary programs, as you've seen this last round of infra and raise, has been really committed to supporting projects that enhance safety, enhance equity, and climate. And because of that, we've seen through some of the investments that we're making that those priorities are also showing greater economic vitality in communities. As you are well aware, states and MPOs have a lot of discretion when it comes to how they spend their formula dollars, right? And that's a challenge when it comes to many of our goals, especially our climate goals. What I was really excited, last year, your governor signed into a law, the 2021 Act on Climate, which setting a mandatory enforceable climate emission reduction goals, leading the state to achieve a net zero emission economy by 2050. As the sector emits the most carbon emissions, the transportation sector, we recognize, must be part of the solution. And if we don't do it through the transportation sector, we know we're not going to achieve our ambitions. So with that in mind, and understanding the role that transportation plays in the built environment in terms of our public health, our equity goals, but also our economic vitality, a number of our modes, particularly FHWA, back in December, released a guidance memo to reinforce that USDOT has high expectations for state DOTs and MPOs in carrying out the president's vision. This memo encourages funding recipients to take a fix-it-first approach, prioritizing repair, rehabilitation, modernizing our existing roads and bridges over expanding capacity. And again, this is not to say you can't expand capacity. The question here is, we have a moment where we have billions and billions and billions of dollars of need of road repair. We should fix the potholes, right? And as we think about capacity, let's think about the capacity in the sense of where we're trying to build towards, especially after we see what's happening with COVID, the future of telework. Let's think about what the future will look like. This guidance applies to both existing programs and new programs. Let me give you a couple of additional highlights about the memo. This memo that was released by the Federal Highway Administration emphasizes to stakeholders that the bipartisan infrastructure law resources can and should be applied to modernize all eligible streets. Keyword, all eligible streets, which includes highways, bridges, but not just ones that are owned and operated by the state DOTs, but also by local roads as well. The memo also encourages state transportation decision makers to direct investments based on the asset condition and the need for modernization. Again, when we talked to Congress and we did our analysis of the performance of our roadways across the country, we saw huge need to improve the condition of our roads. And also modernizing our roads for future flooding, to increase greater mobility. We believe this is a place to go, direction to go. And lastly, this memo also encourages state DOTs to be mindful, and this is the really key part here, be mindful of their ability to flex resources to support multimodal projects that may be more consistent with these priorities. It's funny, Scott, you've been in this space a long time, and there's this nomenclature of federal highway dollars, right? Well, these are actually federal aid transportation dollars. And within those dollars, there's a number of flexibility. And for us, we recognize that there's a federal government working with our state DOTs. We recognize that in order to accomplish our economic goals, to accomplish our safety goals, we have to have a better partnership between the federal, the state, and the local level, and more importantly, with the community to achieve these priorities. This memo should be used as a tool for advocates just like you to engage your state DOTs and MPOs that make sure that, whether it's as we're developing the tips and steps, that those processes are aligned, and also be able to empower community to have a better voice. We need your help to continue to advocate for states and MPOs to use their funding to support our broader goals for greater economic performance, better physical health in communities, to promote equity, safe, and try to achieve and address the climate crisis. This bipartisan infrastructure really represents this generational investment in our infrastructure, but it also represents a generational opportunity to rethink what transportation means in our communities in the built environment. This is an opportunity for us together to use transportation as a tool to connect people to opportunity, to create new businesses, new jobs, reconnect communities previously harmed, and really and finally tackle the climate crisis itself.
Thank you. That's encouraging that you're being active, proactive at DOT, not just giving us dollars and with no guidance. So that's very important. I think one of the things I'd like to have clarified a little bit is how much of the financial opportunity for Rhode Island from the transportation and infrastructure bill is through formula funding, and how much is through competitive grant opportunities. Can you, I mean, I'm not looking for specific percentage breakdown, but can you give us a general sense of that, and also what you think are some of the more exciting competitive grant opportunities that Rhode Island should be pursuing to improve our active transportation options, as well as our overall transit and rail connection?
Absolutely. So again, if you take a step back, you look at the entire program, you will see that there has been a significant increase in our discretionary competitive grant funding in relationship to our formula. Formula still is the majority of funds. Roughly 70% of the funds are formula, but now 30% are actually discretionary. But even within those formula funds, as I pointed out before, for example, the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, which is a formula, but is actually generally have the ability to be self-allocated to your MPOs or major metropolitan areas, that is over $72 billion, of which that Rhode Island would get its share. Those resources, again, can support transit, can support EV charging station, can support walking and biking. That's just one example of the formula program. I also would just call back, even though right now there is nearly $350 billion in terms of, quote, federal aid highway funding, but many of those dollars in themselves actually support walking, biking, and life. So I want to make sure folks are not thinking like, oh my gosh, the formula dollars are like kind of just going to, the McKee or, just state-owned roads. There are many dollars within those spaces, within those pots of money to support walking and biking. So don't just look at the smaller discretionary pot. Also, this is a moment for localities, advocates to work with their state DOTs to understand and really advocate to ensure those formula dollars attach again to those priorities that you guys are championing for. But now on the discretionary side, there are a lot of exciting things that are coming down the pipeline. Again, as I pointed out, one place where local governments, and this is actually intentional, that the Safe Streets for All, again, $6 billion over the next 5 years, is a pot of money that's dedicated only to local governments and MPOs and tribal communities. This is not a program for states, right? And that was by design because we want to give access to local governments who are trying to improve and reduce roadway fatalities. So that's one example. Another program, which actually should not be a shocker because many of you have been huge advocates of the Tiger bill, now known as RAISE. That program, which usually was $1 billion a year, is now potentially $3 billion a year. That competitive program. Now, Rhode Island, you guys have significant successes, most recently in the 21 receiving that RAISE grant. But we're going to see that program over the next 5 years is going to be funded up to potentially to $15 billion. The third program that I will highlight in terms of discretion where local communities within Rhode Island can apply is our infra program. Now, traditionally, this has been for our highway freight, but also one of the things that this infrastructure bill does, it increases multimodal projects to be eligible as well. So passenger rail as well as public transportation are eligible within those spaces. So as you think about how can you address your supply chain, how can you make your various ports more resilient, are great pots of dollars to think through those strategies. and again, not to like, there's probably like 20 different programs I can list here, but another one to think about is the fact that we have a mega projects program of a tune about of several billions of dollars in the next 5 years, which is basically for large scale regional project. And as I know of in Rhode Island, you guys are thinking about how do you expand your commuter rail and local transit, not within Rhode Island, but within the region. And this is a wonderful opportunity to think about and work with your federal state partners around in the region to think about how you guys can apply. So that's just a snapshot. Again, there are new programs like the new Active Transportation Investment Grant program, which is a dedicated grant program to promote more biking, walking, and trails, to give an example. And again, as I mentioned, reconnected communities and so many more are out there. But also, just be mindful, we have a number of new transit-oriented development programs within the infrastructure bill. They expanded the capacity of two of our loan programs called TIFIA and RIF to support transit-oriented development at very low cost to the transit agency and to their private sector partners. So we have a lot of tools. What I think will be really great, one of the things I will say is for mayors or potential project sponsor or applicants who are interested in these programs, we're going to be hosting over the next several weeks a number of webinars. So go to our website, us.transportation.gov, /bipartisan infrastructure law, and you'll see the running of webinars and events that will really spell out in detail some of these programs. So again, a lot of opportunities to really be transformational.
That's really illuminating. And yeah, as you mentioned, we in Rhode Island are very interested in certainly Grow Smart Rhode Island, and I know the governor shares this generally. We want to connect more to the economic powerhouses of our region of Boston and New York. And any way we can make it easier to be part of that economic, regional economic ecosystem, I think the better off we are. And
again, the level of investments that we're putting into the Northeast Corridor and to Amtrak and also to FTA, on particularly the commuter rail side, is a wonderful opportunity. And I think to the extent that Rhode Island and also with your regional partners can get better coordinated, those resources will come.
Great. Well, one of the things you touched on that maybe I'd like to have you elaborate on a little bit is the opportunity to fund transit-oriented, so-called transit-oriented development. We believe that that's a major way for Rhode Island to address some of its housing supply issue and housing affordability issue. We have this assumption that communities may be more receptive to having multifamily housing development in or near transit stations and transit corridors than in more traditional residential sections of their communities. And as you probably know, we have a serious affordable housing problem in Rhode Island. In part, it's because of the good news the governor mentioned that we're recovering quite well from the pandemic, and we're being discovered. And people all over the Northeast and elsewhere are realizing this is a pretty nice place, a very nice place to live. And that's good in many ways, but it has some negative ripple effects in that it's increasing the cost of housing quite dramatically, much more rapidly than an increase in incomes. So with this new transit master plan that Rhode Island has, how can we leverage that effectively in the competitive grant world for TOD development and for other things too? Like, for example, the transit master plan calls for potentially a light rail system, a new light rail system between about a 20-mile stretch between Central Falls in the northern part of our state and TF Green International Airport. And that's a very important project, probably pretty expensive. There's some talk about, there's some consideration of would that be dedicated, a dedicated bus route, or would it be light rail? But we'd certainly be interested in guidance on how we might pursue funding opportunities for that and for TOD generally. So any additional thoughts you have on that, I think could be very
Absolutely. This is one of the areas where both the bipartisan infrastructure law and the president's Build Back Better is works collaboratively. As you pointed out, Rhode Island, particularly in some of your major cores and even in some of your rural communities, are in great need for more mixed income, mixed use development due to the affordable housing challenges that we see. And one of the things that the Build Back Better includes is a number of key investments, particularly in affordable housing. In addition to, I think up to the tune of about $200 billion in affordable housing. So this is one of the critical reasons why, in addition to the bipartisan infrastructure law, why we also need the Build Back Better. In addition, in the Build Back Better,
I said amen.
Amen. In addition to that, there are a number of provisions that Build Back Better that's very complementary to the discussion here. For one, we recognize the need for communities, as you pointed out, recognize the need for greater housing production, particularly in transit-supported corridors, to promote greater walkability. And even those, as you know from the research that shows, even those single-family homes that are adjacent are want those walkable communities next door to them, right? Because it provides greater economic sustainability for them as well. But oftentimes they need the capacity to think through what are those zoning changes? How do we do this in the right way that not only promotes housing production, but also doesn't accelerate potentially displacement, right, of surrounding neighborhoods? And one of the things that was included in the that's in part of the Build Back Better is this idea through HUD. It's called the Unlocking Possibility Program, which is basically a competitive program that will provide resources to localities who are thinking about upzoning and thinking about strategies to promote great fair housing, location efficiency housing, and sustainability. In addition to that, one of the things we worked on with HUD was this concept around, which is included in the Build Back Better. It's called the Affordable Housing and Access Program. This was going to be a $5 billion competitive grant program available to provide greater access to affordable housing and enhance mobility for residents, particularly those in disadvantaged communities persistent in poverty, around transit. So basically, it's either bringing transit to more affordable housing areas or creating more affordable housing near transit. And so that's promoting transit-oriented development. Now, as we are waiting on the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Build Back Better law to pass through Congress, there are some things we are doing right now. For example, FTA has a transit-oriented development planning grant program. So one of the things I would say is that this will be a great opportunity as you're thinking about your transit plan in your TOD corridor. That is a great way to receive planning grants and pre-development dollars to actually start the process, whether it's community engagement, doing the economic and physical impact analysis, environmental reviews of the transit development and the transit plan, as well as the TOD aspect. Also, in addition to that, we also have, and as Scott, as you're aware, there are maybe moments where you have current opportunities where you're thinking about, okay, here's a station that we have, RIPTA specifically, we might want to enter into a joint development agreement. But one of the things that we have within our ability is that FTA, as well as the Department of Transportation, we now have greater ability to provide transit agencies low interest loans in their partnership as part of these joint development agreements with developers who are interested to build housing and commercial development on transit land, but also development that might be adjacent to that. What I would say is, in terms of unlocking, one of the things that I'm encouraging transit agencies as well as the real estate community who are interested in providing more affordable housing, greater commercial opportunities near transit to work together. Put together a package. Don't just look at one site, look at multiple sites, because we have abilities now to work with transit agencies and give them the opportunity to be kind of a regional implementer of their transit-oriented development strategies using some of our financing capacity. So that's just some examples of some of the things we're doing. I would just say one of the things I was really thrilled working with the secretary back in March of 2021, we recognized after several reviews, and many of you have been working on this issue for many of years, that DOT has been sitting on top of some $35 to $80 billion of loan capacity for transit-oriented development and haven't used it. So we actually updated our transit-oriented development guidance back in March to basically say our doors are open. So I see my former mayor from Warwick, who I used to work with a lot with Smart Growth America, now at RIPTA. I'm saying to you directly, do not waste this time. Come talk to us at FTA and at our Build America Bureau, and let's work together to figure out how we can align some of our planning grants, our CIG dollars and some of our transit dollars with our transit-oriented development loan programs so that you're not thinking about this as a project, but as a portfolio. And let's think about scale. We have that opportunity today to do it.
Great. Boy, you're giving us a lot of good tips. You're gonna have a lot of follow-up from people in Rhode Island, Christopher.
I love it. I love it. Rhode Island is one of my favorite states.
But I got some questions from the audience now that I wanna pose to you. Liza in Providence has a provocative question, but I think one you've probably heard before. How do we ensure that she refers to 1.7 billion. I'm not sure which pot of money she's referring to, but how do we ensure that that doesn't exacerbate climate impacts by inducing more demand for driving? I think maybe that's, part of a broader discussion that has occurred within the smart growth world about the fact that there's sort of a tale of two cities here, at least from a smart growth perspective, with regard to the transportation and infrastructure bill. On the one hand, as you pointed out, record investments in transit and in passenger rail, but also potentially a lot of money for DOTs to do highway widening and to create maybe unnecessary additional capacity that will induce more demand for driving. So what are your thoughts about that?
As I said before, one of the things that we have communicated, again, when we issued this guidance memo to our staff, which then was released publicly to state DOTs and to the general public, one of the things let's think about this. Even for those communities that may be outside of the core or away from the transit supported services, we recognize those roads are in desperate need of repair. Climate crisis have shown, and also lack of resources have shown, that our infrastructure is deteriorating. So first and foremost, one of the things we are compelling and really encouraging our state DOT partners, as well as local governments, is to prioritize the improvement of those roads. But not just to improve, kind of like fix it first. We want you to fix it right. Because one of the things that we find, particularly, let's say, in drivable suburban corridors, right, that might have prioritized, throughputs, we're beginning to find that even in those environments, repairing those roads into places where you actually encourage greater walkability, whether it's including sidewalk connectivity, including private bike lanes. Because one of the things we've seen as part of COVID is that there's a great interest of people to be able to look, if I'm teleworking all day, I want to have some level of ability to be active, right? I don't want to sit in front of my. So as you're thinking about that, it's interesting how state DOTs, and we're seeing this across the country, working with the local partners, are finding, wow, even in drivable suburban communities or in design communities, if we added more walking and biking amenities, that improves our public health, that improves our economic vibrancy, and also, particularly in more rural places, we're seeing, well, look, you had a state highway, you may want to expand it, but actually, many rural communities are saying, look, this particular state highway is going through our downtown. Maybe we can repurpose this to encourage greater economic opportunities, i.e. allowing restaurants to use their right-of-way a little bit better. There are opportunities that we're seeing the connectivity of these resources. Again, as you pointed out, Scott, there is this concept that state DOTs are just going to take these dollars and expand. And yes, we're going to be very vigilant through our various processes, whether it's through NEPA, our Title VI, to make sure that, yes, if you have to expand the highway, let's make sure it addresses all the issues that we normally see with highway expansion, and that is truly needed, and it cannot be solved otherwise. Again, this is going to require a partnership, but this also is a wonderful opportunity for stakeholders and community activists and advocates like Grow Smart Rhode Island to work directly with your state DOTs, provide them the data, show them the support, and actually provide additional options. And again, it doesn't have to be one size fit all. Some communities do need highway capacity expansion due to supply chain and other things, but also we can think differently. And this is a moment for groups like yours to really engage and work with your state DOTs as partners.
Great. We're primed to do that. And we're launching a program to train local activists to be more influential in these discussions. One other question from the audience I wanted to get in real quick. We're running out of time, but this is a good question to address. Mal Scarin in Providence asks if there's any discussion at the federal level to replace the gas tax with a road user fee to maintain transportation revenue as more people switch to electric cars.
Say it again,
Yeah,
Scott.
sure.
Yeah.
The basic question is there any consideration at the federal level to replace the gas tax with a road user fee to maintain transportation revenue as more people switch to electric cars?
Listen, one of the things I want to say off the offset, this president has been absolutely clear. This administration will not raise revenue over anyone who makes less than $400,000. Point, full stop. That is a priority. That is our pledge. And as you've seen as part of our negotiations, that has been what we've maintained. As we think about resources, I think one of the things that we are saying here is that, look, we've had, in a bipartisan way, we've made a significant investment in our infrastructure system. As we think about the future, this is one of the things that we're going to be working with stakeholders and Congress and our local, state, and local partners of thinking about what are all the innovative ways what is a sustainable way to fund a transportation. And so right now, I would just tell you, we have shown that we can invest in our infrastructure system, invest in the critical needs in a bipartisan way, while at the same time making sure that we do not raise taxes or fees on individuals making more than $400,000. And that's our commitment.
Very good. Christopher, this has been a pretty whirlwind tour of a lot of issues. And as always, you've done it masterfully. We really appreciate your insights, your knowledge, and we will be continuing to stay in close touch. Keep whetting our appetite.
Bring me your projects, Scott. I want to bring me your projects. Don't wait.
Well, we intend to do that, and we think we're well positioned with the leadership we've got in state government, with the plans we've got, the state transit master plan and the bike mobility plan, the Act on Climate. The fact that we are a compact state in a very populated region, we think we can be a great pilot for the country. And we'll be pressing that case and specific projects with you. And thank you again so much for your insights, your perseverance, your commitment, your vision. To be continued.
To be continued. Thanks again, Scott. Thank you, Grove, Rhode Island. And I hope you guys have a great day and enjoy the conference. Take care, everyone.
All right. Thank you so much, Christopher. So I think a lot for us to chew on and react to and use effectively. We are about to take a break, about a 15-minute stretch break, where you'll get to see more videos about what smart growth rather means to us. I want to remind you that there's a lot of very interesting, informative discussion ahead. We're going to have a panel that's composed mainly of people who are doing transit advocacy at the grassroots level, kind of reacting to this broad presentation that we've had of new federal investments and initiatives, and how do we translate that into changing the facts on the ground at the local level. So stay tuned for that. In 15 minutes, we'll reconvene at roughly 10:15. And thanks again.
Ever since you were a kid, you were told to put others first. Not to be selfish. Give, give, give. What if you can get? Get a better quality of life, a stronger economy, transportation choices. Get to live in a place that has vitality. Yup, I'm talking about good old Rhode Island. Look, it's time to be selfish. No, wait, what are you doing? Selfish, not selfie. Anyways, shall I continue? You want more opportunity, more jobs, more chances to prosper. You want to see small businesses thrive, including maybe even your own. As I said, be selfish. You want less traffic. You want to get around this small state without having to depend on just your car. You want safer streets. You want more bike paths, buses, more buses on this route to get to work, to school, just to get there. I get it. Be selfish. Put yourself first. You want more farmers markets. You love local food. You love food that's from a local farm, that's from a local seafood market, that's from the heavens. Simply delicious. How to burn off those calories? You want to step outside. You want to walk. You want streets filled with shops, filled with energy, life, people.
Oh, you didn't forget about our forests and natural resources, did you?
Of course you did. You want to preserve and protect because you know how good we have it here. Well, guess what? You can have it. You can have it all. So be selfish and remember that everything you want is connected. More transportation choices help revitalize our communities, which brings in and supports businesses, which in turn boosts the economy. Grow Smart Rhode Island works behind the scenes to make it all happen.
We're a public interest group promoting sustainable economic growth, urban and town center revitalization, strengthened transportation system, and a robust agricultural and food sector. And we believe that Rhode Island's best days are ahead of it.
So you know what you want, and you know it's possible. So worry about you. Because when you're putting you first, you're actually putting all of us first, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Tapping into the potential of our community. Now that's a darn good reason to be selfish. It's actually pretty smart. So go ahead and be selfish by supporting Grow Smart Rhode Island.
The very best we can to solve the problems.
How we can transform the state of Rhode Island.
When I had an opportunity to work with Mosaico and work on this factory, I saw it as a way that I can bring back to the neighborhood that gave me my success.
Thinking about, the fact that we're a food desert and that we need to generate some income for people.
Westerly has a very vibrant downtown, but we're also bridging that into the North End neighborhood.
We always look for infill projects that are within the existing fabric of the city.
And in alignment with smart growth principles, we reuse the space.
So we used an impact map framework in developing the plan.
We have already, from January 9th to today, trained and graduated 138 students.
He really believes in smart growth and makes the Blackstone Valley a much better place for everybody to live and work.
His understanding of where the economics of the state should go, combined with awareness of environmental issues.
Poor health in America is a problem. Research shows that it's linked with poverty. To find the seriousness of the problem here at home, just take a look at the latest community health assessment data. An eye-opening high rate of poor health is reported in places like Southside Providence, Central Falls, and Constitution Hill in Woonsocket. This raises a few questions. Does place matter when it comes to health? Can the built environment play a strong role in facilitating access to physical activity and healthy food? Dr. Nicole Alexander Scott believes so.
We know that 80% of where health happens is outside of the examination room. Because of that, we need to shift our investments to the place where people live, where we work, where we learn and go to school, right in our communities.
Since becoming Director of Health in 2015, she laid out a clear vision and targeted strategy. The end game? Improving health outcomes for all Rhode Islanders.
Our HESs are how we will address disparities, and because of that, we decided to make significant investments in HES.
A Health Equity Zone, or HES, is a place-based approach that addresses neighborhood design, transportation, land use, and infrastructure. They've even put in place policies to improve walkability and bikeability. Dr. Alexander Scott's decision to invest heavily in HESs is backed up by research. Healthy communities require a number of ingredients: adequate transportation, parks and open space, access, and safe streets are on that list.
Our health equity zones are community-led, and that's what makes them most successful. They partner with all elements of the community: law enforcement, education, housing, transportation, commerce, and residents.
The persistence of health disparities in Rhode Island, like in any place, is complicated. The best bet we have is to take real action steps towards solutions. In this case, Dr. Alexander Scott has zeroed in on the critical role that place, the built environment and actual physical space we inhabit, has on health outcomes.
We're on a pursuit with Rhode Islanders to move forward on a path, the right path. And on this path, there are some who actually build one for us to help us along the way and to connect people with the power of the places where we live.
The impetus was meeting with hundreds of community members and listening to what they needed the most. And what came out of all those community meetings was that people wanted park space where they could play with their kids, and they wanted a way that they could connect to places in the community.
Public investment that has led to public enjoyment, access from place to place.
Most people didn't have transportation other than public transportation. So we made it our priority to build the Greenway, to connect the west side of Providence, in particular the community of Olneyville, to downtown.
In my experience, it was originally one of the first industrial areas in the country that was really densely developed with industry. When I first started working at Fuss O'Neill 20 years ago, it was just a trashed, contaminated area run along the river that people used, but really as trespassers more than anything. A great investment for the state, and proud to be a part of it.
The power of place, it's a connection between people and place, which can lead to more connected people and communities.
So my dad, who's now retired, for his whole career, never showed up late to work a day in his life. And so he kind of challenged me to do the same. And I've taken up that challenge, and as someone who's been working since they were 15, is now 38, never been late, not once. My name is Peter Van Sciver. I'm the Director of Employment Placement for Year Up. Been doing that for about 6 years. I live on the east side of Providence. So I've always taken the bus. When I was a kid, my mom used to throw me on the bus in the summer and just like send me down to the beach. Just have always been kind of a bus baby. I've just always ridden public transportation, also bike and ride a skateboard. I don't have to park a car downtown. And as we were talking about, I've never been late for work. The times where I've almost been late, it's been times when I've gotten a ride or driven a car to work. So it's just so much more convenient and makes more sense to take public transportation or to ride a bike. Just thinking about, not having car maintenance, not having car insurance, paying for gasoline. I mean, it's amazing. I'm aware of the stigma of people riding public transportation, and it's never affected me in a negative way at all. There are some improvements that I'd like to see. Definitely, I think education around sharing the road with bikes. Scheduling is still an issue. Buses just kind of not being where they say they're going to be. They made some great improvements, turning the North Main Street bus into the R line, the rapid line. Stand at the bus stop there, wait for a bus. One comes every 10 minutes. Take that bus to Kennedy Plaza, and then from there it's about a 3-block walk to work. I think that a lot of people are motivated by saving money. So things around, parking is always an issue downtown. And I think we'll gradually see a shift as, younger generations, they're more flexible with transportation. There's less car ownership. And if we create the infrastructure for it, and people see it, a lot of times it'll be like, oh, hey, look, that person's doing it. I can do it too.
Rhode Island's best days are ahead of us. We're indeed going places. Speaking of which, expanding transportation choices? It takes a lot of work. Year-round, around the clock, research, advocacy, pushing through policy and process, like the Transit Master Plan, designed to make our transit system work better for everyone, now and into the future. So, you have a choice. You can get to work, or you can help GrowSmart RI continue to make it happen for all of us. Yeah, that sounds like the smarter choice.
Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed the brief video interlude during our break. We're now shifting to our panel discussion, and we're really fortunate to have an accomplished set of people to help us unpack the varied opportunities to make it easier and more convenient for Rhode Islanders to get about their lives using public transit in this, the second most urbanized state in the country. By the way, a little factoid, the only state that's more urbanized than Rhode Island is New Jersey. Kyle Bennett, a gentleman I've had the pleasure to know professionally for many years, will be the moderator for today's panel discussion. Kyle has devoted his personal and professional life to serving the Rhode Island community through prodigious contributions of his time and his talent. He's currently the Director of Policy and Research at United Way of Rhode Island. In that position, Kyle manages a team of people focusing on defining and overcoming key challenges for our community. Prior to working for United Way, Kyle held several community-based positions, including Director of Black Affairs for the City of Providence and Communications Specialist for the Rhode Island Air National Guard. And just last month, he was appointed to the State Transportation Advisory Committee, where he'll be serving with my colleague, John Flaherty, making some key recommendations about how to use these new federal transit dollars and existing state transportation monies as well. So Kyle, thanks again for everything you do for the community and your partnership with Grow Smart Rhode Island, and please take it away.
Thank you, Scott, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to Grow Smart's 2022 Transit Panel Discussion. Let's do it. Better transit for Rhode Island. As Scott mentioned, my name's Kyle Bennett. I'm Director of Policy and Equity for United Way of Rhode Island. In all things, we start with the notion of community first, and that's why I love the title of this event today. Let's do it, implying that we're doing this together with the community on behalf of the community. Chris Coes brought us to church today. That was an exciting and informative presentation. I'm particularly excited to hear the possibilities for transit and the intentionality of investment in our local communities as well as thoroughfares. Next, I'll introduce a series of speakers who Scott has alluded to, the fact that they are incredibly adept at their profession and their connectivity to this issue of transit. Today, we have Greg Norton. Greg is the Chief of Strategic Advancement for RIPTA. Sue Mara, Senior Project Planner at the firm of Weston and Sampson. Dwayne Keys, Chairperson of South Providence Neighborhood Association. And Mela Bush Miles, the Director of Transit-Oriented Development and the T-Riders Union at Alternatives for Community and Environment in Roxbury, Massachusetts. Starting up, we'll hear from Greg Norton. Greg will provide an overview of Rhode Island Transit's master plan and its recommendations. He's risen through the ranks at RIPTA since joining them in 2011, where he started designing the very successful R-Line rapid bus service. Greg.
Thanks, Kyle. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today to talk about buses and transit. This is good stuff. So I'm going to give an overview today of what exactly is in Rhode Island's Transit Master Plan. This is a huge document that's going to hopefully guide us for the next couple of decades as we're making investment in transit. And so I just wanted to provide a baseline about what we're even talking about today. If I could go to the next slide, please. Actually, you can go one more slide. So at its core, this is a really visionary document. This was adopted by the State Planning Council back in December of 2020. This is actually the state's first coordinated transit master plan. We've always been a subset of the long-range transportation plan, but this is a complementary separate document that is really focused on investing in transit in a way that the state has never done before. And this is really focused on system growth. We intentionally set out to talk about the fact that we know that RIPTA and our transit offerings today are not properly sized for the ridership we have and the density of our state. We have great characteristics that make us primed to be a leader in the transit, leader in the U.S. in terms of transit, but we just haven't made those investments. So we wanted this to be a study that was cost aware, but not necessarily cost constrained. We wanted something that we were growing for. We also set out to make sure that this plan was mode neutral. So we're not just talking about buses. We're not just talking about rail. We're talking about the whole suite of opportunities. So micro transit, bus, rail, bus rapid transit, light rail, streetcar, keeping everything on the table as long as it was moving large numbers of people. Next slide, please. A little bit about how we formed this plan. This was actually an intensive 18-month process that we went through that began in 2019. And we really made sure that we wanted to make sure that this plan reflected the needs of our riders and people who were potential riders in our system. It wasn't necessarily a top-down plan, but tried to have it as grassroots and get as much public engagement as possible. So we actually held a series of statewide pop-up events. We had over 1,000 interactions at those events. And at those events, we got upwards of 400 comments from people that had suggestions about what they wanted to see out of our transit system. We also held transit talks. We met with municipalities. We talked to various stakeholders, not just in the government side, but we talked to businesses. We talked to rider groups. We talked to pretty much anybody that would listen to us when we knocked on their door. We also had an online engagement process. We had we had about 90 comments there. And then we held major public workshops throughout the process, really focused on bringing people together, talking about where we were in our process, and again, using that feedback to help guide where we were going next. Next slide, please. And out of this process, we really came up with basically 5 recommendations. And these recommendations are pretty straightforward. These are improving our existing services. So this is making investments in, I'll go into these more in a moment, but improving existing service, expanding service to new areas, developing high capacity transit and other new modes, improving our access to transit, and making our transit services easier to use. Next slide, please. So going into a little bit of detail about what each of these recommendations, improving existing services is taking what's already there and just making it better. And this is really the backbone of Transit Forward Rhode Island 2040. This is the thing we heard most from our passengers, that they wanted to that what we were doing wasn't necessarily not working. They just wanted more of it. So this is focusing on frequency in our existing network. Really building out our frequent bus routes. Right now we have one route that operates every 10 minutes or better. We want that to expand to many routes, making service go later at night, earlier in the morning, so people who are not necessarily working a 9-to-5 traditional job can rely on transit to get to and from work. Really doing things to make the existing services better. It shouldn't take you 2 hours to go across our small state. And so we want to make sure that we're prioritizing transit, getting it out of traffic whenever appropriate, really giving it a priority over other modes, so that people who are on those vehicles can get to where they need to go as quickly as possible. Also, things like more express service, nicer vehicles, more flex services. So this is really focused on our rural parts of the state where maybe fixed route big buses don't make sense. This is looking at places like Burrillville, Foster, Hopkinton, where maybe we need to think about smaller vehicles that are doing more flexible things with more on demand, using technology, and taking our flex program that we currently have and just making it more robust. And then really focusing on our connection regionally. We have the benefit of having a very popular commuter rail line into Boston. We should be doing everything we can to make sure that is as frequent as possible and gets people connected regionally as quickly as possible. The second major recommendation was expanding service into new areas. This is looking at our traditional services, such as our fixed route buses. This is going places we don't currently go. There's a lot of need for crosstown connections. So we're looking at Mineral Spring Avenue, Park Ave in Cranston. There's definitely, the possibility of better integrating transit into rail and thinking about how we're expanding both the footprint of both and into areas and parts of the state where it doesn't necessarily exist today. And then it's also using technology. There's been so much that's been happening with the invention of the smartphone, and looking at how we're using those devices to better improve mobility, looking at those on-demand services that are really focused on using real-time technology. We're also looking at this concept called a mobility hub, which is I'll talk a little bit more about here in a moment. And then just working with municipalities and other stakeholders to really expand service using some innovative partnerships. Next slide, please. The third recommendation is the development of high capacity transit. This is probably the piece of the master plan that's gotten the most attention because it is so big, and I'll talk a little more about this, but this is really looking at modes we don't have today and how they can better serve Rhode Island than our current bus network. So we're primarily a bus-based system. We do have the integration with the MBTA, but this is really looking at, do we need to bring things like light rail, bus rapid transit, rapid bus, which is like BRT but doesn't have its own dedicated right-of-way, or regional rapid bus where we're using shoulders, highway shoulders to move people from, Woonsocket down to Providence without necessarily getting stuck in the traffic on 146. And this is a big recommendation, but it's definitely not what I would consider the backbone of our plan. It's just meant to work in coordination with what we're seeing on the bus improvements. Next slide, please. The fourth recommendation is how we're talking about not necessarily exactly transit, but how we're getting people to transit. And this is really, the old saying is every bus rider starts and ends as a pedestrian. So this is talking about all those first and last mile connections. making sure that our sidewalks that are connecting transit to neighborhoods are adequate and that they're accessible. Making sure that park and ride lots are as robust as they need to be, making sure that we're focusing on things like bicycle improvements so that we can get people that are live in surrounding communities on their bikes, and then they can get to the bus stop and put their bike on the bus and make it as easy as possible. This is looking at working with business parks such as Quonset or Highland Business Park up in Smithfield and Woonsocket, Lincoln and Woonsocket, to make sure that employers are incentivizing transit, and then looking at innovative rideshare partnerships. And then the final recommendation coming out of our master plan is really that we just make transit easier to use. And this is, again, things like using smart cards, or better information and signage, better integration, thinking about how we're integrating payment across different transit platforms, maybe integrating with bike share, that type of thing. So those are the 5 recommendations. Next slide, please. And I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of what we think at a high level, what the benefits of this plan are going to be. And I'll get more into the specifics of what some of the recommendations, but let's move on to the benefits, please. Next slide, please. So we think that when implemented in full, this plan is going to really impact Rhode Island in 5 key ways. We live on number 5, apparently. And this is going to really, this plan will essentially make it easier to live, work, and learn in Rhode Island. It will also have a positive impact on our economy, creating more jobs, more mobility for people to get to jobs. It will also expand people's choice. So, people who choose to ride transit right now, there's one of the criticisms over the transit system today is that it's not necessarily a viable choice for many people. We want to change that. It'll also open up opportunity, so it'll connect not only people to jobs, but more jobs will be connected, giving people the opportunity to pursue different lines of work or get to different locations that they necessarily can't today. And then the 5th benefit is that this is really just going to help us create a more environmentally sustainable and healthy community. This is, transit is key in combating climate change, because you're getting people out of single occupancy vehicles and really, thinking more smartly about their travel patterns. Next slide, please. So in regards to making Rhode Island a better place to live, work, learn, and live, this plan, when implemented, we expect that 90% of all jobs in the state will be accessible by transit, and over 350,000 jobs will be accessible by what we consider frequent transit, which means a bus coming every about 15 to 20 minutes all day throughout the day. We also expect that this is going to connect over 80,000 college students with better transit, and that 59% of our trips, we expect that over 59% of our trips will be used for non-work purposes. So this is getting people shopping, going out on social visits, doctor's appointments. It's not necessarily just going to work. Next slide, please. We expect that this plan is going to have a positive impact on the state's economy. We expect that this plan will have create over 19,000 jobs in the implementation of it, with over 3,700 jobs of those being permanent in the long term. We expect that there's also the potential for upwards of $2 to $5 billion of opportunity in transit-oriented development as well. Next slide, please. This is also, we also expect that at the end, when this plan is fully implemented, that this is just going to provide people with more choices. And again, frequent transit really is one of the key things coming out of this. More buses, more hours of the day, and we expect that almost 50% of our state's residents will be served by frequent transit at the implementation of this plan in full, and almost 60% of jobs will be on frequent transit networks. We expect that service in general, people are going to see service that's up to 2 hours later at night. We expect it to have over 19 routes that are operating past midnight. And that we expect to see service speed improvements of up to 25%, with reduced wait times of up to about a third. All these things combined, we think that we model that we'll see growth upwards of 60% over our current ridership, pre-COVID-19 ridership, which puts us in the range of about 25 to 30 million trips annually. Next slide, please. And then this is really just about helping Rhode Islanders this is really about helping Rhode Islanders live better lives and connecting people to where they want to go and making the state more accessible for everyone. So this is a plan that, when implemented in full, 72% of our state's low-income residents will be connected by frequent transit, and 86% of our minority residents as well. This is going to really have a positive impact on just general mobility for essential workers, and there's also money that goes back in people's pockets. The cost of owning a car is not free. Transit is a much better way to get money back in people's pockets, and we anticipate that on average, the average household will save over $8,000 a year by switching to transit from single occupancy vehicles. Next slide, please. And then, last but not least, transit. One of the more important benefits that transit will bring to the Rhode Island is that it will help us create just a healthier environment. And we anticipate that with the full implementation of the Transit Forward Plan, we'll see over 200,000 metric tons of greenhouse gases removed from our emissions, which is the equivalent of over 50,000 cars. We expect that we'll see traffic congestion decrease by 8%, which is 80% of the state's goal for 2050. And we expect that the average average rider will see upwards of 22 minutes of physical activity a day just by getting to and from the bus stop and walking more. Next slide, please. So getting into some of the specifics of what we're planning. Next slide, please. I want to just highlight here that while this is a statewide plan, going through each of the recommendations across the state is pretty, that could be its own side panel. So I'm not going to be talking about the whole state, but I'm going to be talking about sort of the Metro Core right now. But I just want to be clear that this is not limited to the Providence Metro Core. This plan has recommendations for every municipality in our state, Newport, Woonsocket, Scituate, Foster. Everyone's in this plan to some degree, but I did want to focus on sort of where the bulk of the investment and the improvements are going to show today. So I just wanted to focus a little bit on the metro area. But some of the improvements we're showing here is that we are beginning the planning stages of a light rail or BRT connection that will connect Providence, Pawtucket, Central Falls, Cranston, and Warwick, and this will connect all the way down to TF Green or CCRI. We're getting ready to kick off a planning study on that. We're also looking at some regional bus service that's connecting the northern part of the metro area, specifically connecting Providence all the way up to Woonsocket, but then also making connections down to South County and Newport as well. We're anticipating that there will be at least 5 mobility hubs in the northern part of the metro area. And really quickly, a mobility hub is an area where you have a dedicated site where you have a transit intensive focus, but it's also focusing on bringing other types of modes together. So you might see things like bike share, you might see things like car share opportunities, and it's looking at things like you might see like Amazon lockers or dry cleaners or those types of amenities are transit supportive, and it's really done in a way that is tailored specifically to the needs of the community. But some of the other investments we're planning on seeing in the Metro North area, more frequent service. We actually are planning new crosstown routes. I've mentioned Mineral Spring Avenue. We're also looking at longer spans of service on pretty much every route in this area. Next slide, please. Moving to the south slightly, we are, as I mentioned, we're talking about this 20-mile light rail BRT corridor that connects Pawtucket, Central Falls, Providence, Cranston, and Warwick. We're also looking at more regional rapid bus service that's connecting the southern part up north. So you'll see connections to Newport here. And then you're going to see mobility hubs at 2 locations in the southern part of the metro area, one at CCRI Warwick and one at TF Green Airport. And then obviously more of the same in terms of more frequent service on existing routes, later service, earlier service, and again, more crosstown routes. Specifically, we're looking at Park Ave, Atwood Avenue. We're also looking at, I can't remember, route Bald Hill Road. We're looking at pretty significant improvements there. Next slide, please. Sorry, I had a momentary lapse. So I want to talk a little bit about sort of the financials end of this, because as I mentioned at the head, this is not a cost neutral plan. This is definitely accounts for some level of growth. Next slide, please. And so we're looking at a capital cost spread out over the next 20 years, anywhere between 2.1 billion and 3.2 billion to bring this plan into full development. 3.2 billion is if this includes light rail. Without light rail, if we go with the BRT option, that would be about 2.1 billion. And then the operating costs we expect to be somewhere between 275 to $300 million a year in 2040, which is represents a doubling of RIPTA's current operational budget. This might seem like a little bit of sticker shock. Next slide, please. But these investments are really in line with what we're seeing nationally. So you're seeing nationally places that are taking on transit initiatives are by far successful. Most of the ballot initiatives in 2020 and 2021 were successful. And we're seeing places that are spending upwards of $7, $8, $10 billion on transit. So we're not out of line with our peers around the country. And I'd always like to note that, even though we are a small state, we have a very high propensity of people who do use transit in comparison to much larger peers. I'm looking at places like Indianapolis, Kansas City. These are places that are much larger than Rhode Island, that have much higher investments in transit, but also carry fewer passengers. So this level of investment is right in line with where we need to be in terms of making our transit system that reflects the actual ridership we have today. Next slide, please. So one more slide, please. And so while this is all going on in the background in terms of we've developed this plan and we're looking for funding for it, we're not just sitting here waiting for money to fall from the sky to begin implementing this. We're actually starting the ground stages now of beginning many of the implementation things that we can, starting the planning phase, knowing that there's federal funds coming through the infrastructure bills. We're doing everything we can to basically move ourselves into the pipeline to start receiving those funds as quickly as possible. So this is just a smattering of some of the stuff that we're currently working on at this moment. We actually have a series of service enhancements that are going into effect tomorrow that will improve weekend service across many parts of the state. We focused that primarily in the South County area, but you'll see improvements on a bunch of routes outside of South County as well. We're also in the middle of development of 2 new bus hubs, one at the CCRI Warwick campus and then one at URI. We've received a $900,000 grant from the Federal Transit Administration to begin planning on that BRT light rail corridor connecting Central Falls down to Warwick. We've actually just released a request for proposals for an action plan that basically will fully electrify our fleet and account for system growth. So this is called our Action Plan for Electrification and Service Growth. I like to think of if the Transit Master Plan is the cake, this is the instructions on how you build the cake. And so this plan or bake the cake, I should say. So this plan is going to give us a clear, detailed plan on how we want to implement the Transit Master Plan. We have a grant application to develop a mobility hub in Woonsocket. We're in the process of upgrading our flex system in West Warwick to be on demand rather than a 24-hour reservation window. And then we're also in the process of converting our Middletown garage to be fully electrified. Next slide, please. Continuing, we're also in the process of developing a program to improve our bus stops across the state. So we're hoping to put out more shelters, which was one of the things we heard in the master plan most frequently. We're going to be redesigning our bus stop signs so that they provide more information to our passengers. And then last but not least, we're developing a municipal van program so rural communities that don't necessarily have a ton of transit service will have access to vehicles to make sure that their residents can connect to transit service. And then on the DOT side, they're leading the charge on some of the heavier capital investments. Specifically, they are working on the new transit center up in Pawtucket and Central Falls. And then last but not least, they are working on, currently they're doing assessments of some of their state highways where they can make transit investments and get those baked into their road projects. Next slide, please. Just to move this along a little more quickly, I realize I'm taking up a lot of time. We are also working very closely with the leadership at the state level on how we start to fund this program. While there is federal funds, the state will be required to participate in this to to help bring this to life. The federal government has historically been very interested in paying for capital, but we do need operating to help this. So we are working very closely with how we, with our legislators on funding this program. Next slide, please. And we can go to the next slide. I'm going to skip over this. And I've already talked about that, so let's go to the end. So that wraps it up for me. I'd be happy to take some questions at the end. I know we're going to have a discussion about this as a panel, but Kyle, I'll send it back to you. Thank you so much.
Greg, wow, that was a lot of information. Thank you for a comprehensive explanation of the plan. Our viewers already have lots of questions for you. I'll remind you that both the links to the biographies for each of the panelists can be found on the main event website. And if you have questions for the panelists, please add them to the chat there so that we can follow up at the end of the presentation. Thank you so much. Next, we'll hear from Sue Mara. Again, Sue is the senior project planner at the firm of Weston and Sampson. She's formerly and recently the director of planning for the city of Pawtucket. Sue was with the city of Pawtucket's planning department for more than 8 years through many transit projects, and she'll describe how she and the city of Pawtucket collaborated with RIPTA and local transit improvements. Sue.
Thank you, Kyle. Thanks. And also thank you to GrowSmart for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm very happy to be here. So as Kyle mentioned, I was very recently the planning director for the city of Pawtucket, although I was there for 17 years, not 8 years. In that time, I started as a senior planner, worked my way up through planning director. And so, through that time, had a lot of opportunity to work collaboratively with RIPTA on a number of different type of projects. The biggest and most consistent was the Pawtucket Central Falls Transit Center. So this project is, for those of you who might be unaware, $50 million public investment in the city of Pawtucket near the border with Central Falls that will result in a commuter rail stop on the MBTA commuter rail line that runs from Providence to Boston, but also connected to a bus hub, so the Pawtucket bus hub, and also connected to bike infrastructure. So this is a monumental, significant public investment in transit. So I looked back and tried to pull out some of the lessons learned from our collaboration with RIPTA over the years through that project. And, I think that some of them are probably applicable to the work that a lot of the municipalities are doing with RIPTA, even those municipalities who don't have a $50 million, 20-year project. So the first lesson learned that I wanted to highlight, and this is really, I think, the most critical, is timing. Right. So all of these projects, even the ones that are, much smaller scale, work along a trajectory where, there's different milestones along the way related to funding and related to permitting. And, every one of those steps sort of sets the parameters a little tighter. So, having those conversations at the beginning just, provides a lot more opportunity for working together between the municipalities and the transit agency. So the second lesson learned I wanted to highlight is somewhat related, and that just the real importance of relationships and communication between the municipalities and the transit agencies. One specific, so the city's goals, right? So as planners, our goals are to provide a certain quality of life for the city residents. And RIPTA's goals are to provide quality transit service for its riders. And there's a lot of overlap there, but it's not, completely aligned. And so I think that, getting to those relationships and that communication, you can sort of identify, where those things are aligned, and help work through the things that aren't aligned. One example that I'll give from our work on the transit center has to do with the transit emphasis corridor that is a part of the overall project. So in addition to the bus hub that's located at the train station, there's a transit emphasis corridor, which is basically a 2 miles of a major commercial corridor in downtown Pawtucket, which, we're really going to emphasize, transit along there. And so there'll be 2 major super stops along that route culminating in the bus hub. So when we started to talk to RIPTA about this, they were really pushing from the very beginning for dedicated bus lanes, as they should. And the initial conversations were a little tough because being in downtown Pawtucket, right, there's only so much real estate there, for the different types of uses. And from the planner side, we're like, they want how many feet of dedicated bus lines? What do they think this is, Portland, Oregon? And on the other side, RIPTA is sort of saying to us, like, you guys really that hung up about losing 3 on-street parking spaces? And so it kind of, that led to a little bit of a conflict. But through our conversations and having a deeper discussion about it, on the planner side, we came to understand that the bus lanes, the dedicated bus lanes, in addition to helping them to provide really quality service to Pawtucket residents and state residents, is really critical to their overall operational capacity. So every foot of a dedicated bus line helps them to increase their operational funding, which really makes a huge difference for an agency like RIPTA. So sort of understanding where they're coming from was really helpful. And then on our side, we were able to sort of explain to them that no, as planners, we don't love on-street parking as the highest and best land use, but we're working to revitalize our downtown, and a lot of these storefront uses, particularly like retail, coffee shops, restaurants, that short-term readily available parking is really important to them. So if it's important to them, we need to be able to provide that. Otherwise, we won't be able to attract those types of uses. So, the conflict doesn't go away, but I think that understanding where each other is coming from does make the discussion more productive, and you do end up with a solution that I think works better for everybody. So the third lesson learned I want to bring up is the importance of on the ground site visits, right? And the example I want to talk about here is there sort of a major transit stop. So it's one of the big stops along our transit emphasis corridor that we're planning in front of Walgreens in Pawtucket. And it's at an intersection of Exchange Street, which is a big commercial corridor, Broad Street, which is a big commercial corridor, and a couple of other streets. The intersection is really busy and disorganized. And it's one thing for us as planners to sit across the table from the people who are designing the intersection and say, it's really important that there be safe pedestrian crossing here. It's another thing to have them go and meet you on site, and you can see, just how busy this stop is. I think it's, one of the busiest on RIPTA's system, and see that across the way is a high rise where a lot of seniors live and a lot of people with some physical disabilities, and walking across this expansive asphalt, and seeing how hurried you feel as an able-bodied person trying to get across this big expanse before the pedestrian phase clicks down, and then watching people in wheelchairs and people who are visually impaired also trying to navigate this same space. When the designers see that and feel that, I think at the end of the day you end up with a much better product. So we I think that being on the ground, being on site, is really critical to coming up with a good solution. And as I was writing down these lessons learned, I think that they do sort of all fit under the same umbrella of just having the transit agency be a partner in the process versus I don't know, almost like a regulator or someone to, show the design to once it's done and say oh, what do you think now? If they're not, involved as a partner, I think you lose a lot of opportunities for some good collaborative solutions. And the other thing I wanted to talk about a little bit as far as advice or opportunities for planners to, be able to advocate for transit in their communities is around sustainability and resilience. So there's a lot of activity, and there's a lot of energy around, in the planning profession about how to address climate change and how to address the impacts of climate change. And, you know, I think that a lot of the federal funding that's on the horizon will, be tied to these ideas of sustainability and resilience. And I do think that we as planners sometimes tend to focus on design solutions in that realm, like green infrastructure design or low impact development or shoreline restoration. And that's important, but at the end of the day, if you're using green infrastructure on a parking lot, that only gets you so far, as to trying to tackle this big issue of climate change. But what can be really transformative in reducing greenhouse gas emissions is transit, right? And so I think that talking about transit service as not just a social service, but as part of everyone's work to address climate change is really important and can be helpful when you're talking about this and doing your education and your communication with your city councils and your town councils and your city residents who maybe aren't transit users. So I think building that language about sustainability and resilience is also a really great opportunity. So that's about all I have this morning. Thank you again, everyone in the audience, for all of your time and attention, and I will turn it back to Kyle. Thank you.
Wow, Sue, how exciting. Those who know me best, they know that I'm an affordable housing advocate first. However, I can't wait for this development to be completed just so I can ride the train and stop in Pawtucket or Central Falls for lunch or dinner. I'm really excited about this. Thank you so much for that presentation. I think it's the tip of the iceberg in terms of development in that region. So thanks again. Our next speaker is Dwayne Keys. Dwayne is the chairperson for South Providence Neighborhood Association. My apologies. Dwayne has spent over 17 years, another 17-year guy, advocating on behalf of historically and excluded and disenfranchised communities for economic justice and full inclusion and economic prosperity. He'll be discussing the necessity and benefits of meaningful community engagement. Dwayne.
Great. Thank you so very much, Kyle. And thank you to all our listeners and viewers today. I am just looking forward to our future discussion and the questions. So yes, and for those, please forgive me. I'll be looking up and down because there were key specific points that I want to make sure were clear and that I had addressed in my remarks. But again, as Kyle said, I am the volunteer chairperson of the South Providence Neighborhood Association. And over the past 6 years, our group has evolved and transformed. We started out simply as an interest group of neighbors who wanted to address particular concerns and issues that we had in our neighborhood. And believe me, there have been many. I mean, you talk about zoning, urban planning, transit, housing, environment, hunger, displacement, employment, poverty, economic prosperity, small business, you name it, it's come up in our meetings and our discussions. And we have had a number of issues that over time, we've changed our strategy from merely just addressing, or as I like to call doing the short-term banding option, to really let's look at and dismantle and undo the systemic and structural barriers and challenges that are preventing our residents from experiencing the high quality of life that they need and deserve within those areas. And so it was also very clear that we needed to make sure that the processes and experiences for the makeup of our residents suited them. And when I say who we are, I like to say that our neighborhood, in terms of the South Side overall, but SBNA's footprint, is made up of people who I like to call powerful groups targeted for oppression. So you may hear of Black, Latinx, Indigenous, Southeast Asian, BIPOC, people of color, Black and brown, LGBTQ, immigrants, disabled, elderly, low to moderate income, even unhoused. I like to say those are what I like to call powerful groups targeted for oppression. That's who we are in the South Providence Neighborhood Association. I really don't care for the disenfranchised or the rural terms, because we need to call what exactly who we are and what's happening in which our groups have been historically excluded from such processes. So it was very important that whatever process and experience when it comes to public engagement, public participation, when it comes to the decision making of whatever we do within those areas, but particularly zoning, urban planning, and obviously today transit, it suited their needs, accommodations, and conveniences. part of that process then became evaluating what it had already existed. And what became very clear is that the public participation processes and decision-making processes were never designed to include those powerful groups. Mostly they've catered to property owners, those with high incomes, the wealthy and well-to-do, and for those who have a general understanding of the racial wealth gap, those persons typically are white. So it became very clear that systems that create and perpetuate exclusion and oppression and are rooted in white supremacy could not be used. So over the last couple of years, SB&A has really come up with its own 3 key elements of robust community engagement, or a full public participation process. Number one has been robust community engagement. It means changing our methods of how we collect and receive feedback from particular projects, also changing it so it's not a one-time per project, but it's on an ongoing basis, and that we're using multiple methods to collect and receive that feedback. Using technology, but also being mindful that there are those who do not have access to such technology. So how are we using alternative means of collecting data, collecting that feedback? And again, with those powerful excluded, powerful groups targeted for oppression, again, those who normally don't participate, make sure we cater and adjust our methods to their needs. Also changing the start time of when we launch that community input. We mostly see the process of, we have an idea, let's put our PowerPoint presentation, let's put our plans in place, our design, get everyone together, and then we didn't come up with a plan, what do you think? No. Instead, let's start off, I have an idea. And from there, from the onset of that idea, you start your engagement process. You start collecting that feedback. You start collecting responses on an idea, and you keep that ongoing engagement going throughout the entire process. That way, at the end of development of an idea, you've already got the public buy-in, you've already had your engagement because you've been doing all that time. You're constantly listening to each other, to those who are going to be impacted. But engagement by itself is not enough. Many people are thinking, we didn't talk to the community, we talked to these set of folks, we're done, we're good, we're ready to go. No, you're not. That was part one. Part two is impact assessments. And what we mean by that is that it's not just enough to say, we have this idea, but we need to really analyze to determine if the potential outcomes are really going to be beneficial to the community and to us as a whole. What are the pros and cons? What are the risks and the rewards? I mean, what exactly will happen if we put this project into place? Have we done any testing? Have we done any type of trial runs before we go full speed ahead with a particular idea? It's best to analyze, again, for those powerful groups targeted for oppression, is there going to be any adverse impacts to them? We need to make sure that we do the assessment first, along with that engagement. And then lastly, a new process we were talking about is democratic decision making. Now, I'm sure people are thinking, okay, you're talking about participatory budgeting or PB. That's one example. But what we really mean is talking about, are we providing updates in our process? Do we have answers to frequently asked questions for people to see and use and read? Are we having open processes within this making that decision? Are we providing explanations of why we made a decision, or why we're doing a particular process, or why we made a selection in terms of certain ways? Are we proactively telling the public about our ideas and our concepts? I mean, if something is so good and wonderful and fabulous and marvelous, it's going to be so beneficial to us all, why aren't we making sure that everyone knows about it? If it's good for everyone, everyone should know. Only, I would say, with those 3 components can such participation and engagement be considered meaningful. And more, quote, if something in that impact, in the impact assessment shows that the risks outweigh the rewards, we shouldn't be doing it anyway. I like to say that when it comes to those 3 components, you really will achieve that true meaningful community engagement. It's smart, it's 21st century, it's modern, it suits what we need, and it's not some throwback to 1950s. It's one process in which we all can be engaged. There's your inclusion. It's a process in which it reduces and closes those participation gaps. There's your equity. It builds trust, particularly with those groups that have been historically excluded. It reduces and eliminates your opposition, and obviously can prevent any particular legal challenges that may come up, and we've seen that in prior situations. Overall, SB&A, we definitely have seen success with projects in the South Side when all 3 of those elements are included. And particularly for those who've made statements about Black Lives Matter, being anti-racist, really uplifting Black and brown folks and those historically excluded, these are the best ways to put to action your verbal commitments. So I look forward to the questions, the statements, the feedback, and our discussion. And thank you all again so very much for your time, and GrowSmart for putting this this wonderful panel and program together.
Wow, Dwayne. Powerful groups of people targeted for oppression. I'm still blown away by that. Just that phrase that's accurate and uplifting while also eye-opening. I can't say anymore right now. I'm going to wait because our next speaker, our next panelist is ready and willing. Mela Bush Miles is the Director of Transit-Oriented Development and the T-Riders Union at Alternatives for Community and Environment in Roxbury, Massachusetts. Mela is a nationally recognized climate and environmental justice activist and an organizer with over 20 years experience building organizations, programs, and movements, not moments, movements that benefit low-income communities and communities of color. She'll be sharing her lessons learned and advocacy insights at advocating for better transit in the greater Roxbury area. Mela.
Glad to be here this morning. Yes, I am. I have been working for over 20 years on transit and environmental justice around the Boston area. I was motivated by my children, all of whom have asthma on some level of severity, from mild to chronic breathing difficulties. So we have been working on this, and I got up in some of the things that we have been working on through the T-Riders Union specifically, which is an organized group of transit riders that are fighting for first-class MBTA service in Greater Boston. The T-Riders Union is a voice of the movement for equitable public transportation in lower-income communities and communities of color. We demand respect, equality, equity, accountability, first-class service, accessibility, and affordability. Some of the campaigns that we're working on right now are around low-income fares. We have found that in Boston, there was a rather inequitable way that the MBTA rolled out their automated fare collection system back in 2006. What they did was they added a surcharge to try and quote unquote incentivize folks to not use cash on board. But that surcharge then was transferred over to the transit dependent riders, and the majority of the people who were paying the higher price to ride the T were the people who were totally transit dependent, had a lower per capita automobile ownership. So that went on until 2020 when they removed the surcharge. So that's one issue that we had to fight from 2006 until 2020 to try and get them to remove that surcharge. The only reason they removed it is because they plan to roll out a $900 million new fare collection program over the next couple of years. They're calling it fare transformation. And part of that fare transformation was to make a cashless system, so they couldn't continue to charge a surcharge for that. One of the big things that I have worked on over the past, since 2006 as well, is the Fairmount Line. The Fairmount Line is a commuter rail, I would say, quote unquote, commuter rail line that is not commuter rail by definition. It's a 9.2 mile long rail line that is self-contained within the city of Boston. Most commuter rail, all of the other commuter rail lines were designed to have stations really far apart, and then to get people from the urban core or downtown who are commuting to work out to the suburbs. And the Fairmount line runs through the area of Boston where 25% of its residents live, and the majority of low income and people of color live along this corridor. So transit dependent, very low ownership of automobiles. We worked very diligently to get that line built out, and it came from the bottom up. It was not the MBTA's plan to expand the service, to add more stops along that line. They had planned to shut it down after they finished building out the Southwest Corridor, which actually has the Amtrak and the commuter rail that runs down the Providence Stoughton line that runs to Rhode Island. So once they were finished straightening out those tracks, electrifying, and moving the Orange Line over to the Southwest Corridor, they said, oh, we don't need that little shuttle that got people around that construction while it was happening anymore, and they planned to shut the line down. But folks rose up and said, no, not only should you not shut it down, and this was community driven, but you should actually expand it, give us a seat, give us a one seat access into downtown Boston, and give us reverse commutes so that we can get around in our community. And we work to have that be the Indigo line. We have not gotten the color designation, but we did get 4 new stations. And we're still continue to work on marketing. And recently they added last year the Charlie card access so that you can use your pass on there, because for all the years that it's been up since 2012, you couldn't use a Charlie card. So if you had money stored on your stored value card, you had to pay again to ride on the Fairmount line because they wouldn't accept it and they would only take cash on board. So we have succeeded in doing that. In addition, currently we are working on a number of ways to address access to public transportation. We have a low-income fare pilot that the MBTA was expected to implement in December of 2021. It has not been, there was a 3-month lag with no MBTA board of directors until Governor Baker just formed a new one in October. So from June till October, there was no board of directors of the MBTA. So now we are working with them to get that done. So the low-income fare pass, which is something, it offers a discounted fare pass that costs $30 a month, and it would be for folks within 300% of the federal poverty level. We also currently have a free bus pilot going on that we worked with our current mayor, Michelle Wu, to get that free bus pilot. The interim mayor started it, Kim Janey, who just was, she served after our mayor went to be the Secretary of Labor in the Biden administration. And she actually expanded what Kim Janey, the interim mayor, started to now have a 2-year pilot for a 2-year pilot of the free buses and its 3 bus routes to just see how that can work out. And those are in transit-dependent communities. And that she used ARPA funds to the city of Boston to the tune of about $8 million to get that done. On the Fairmount line, we also did fare fares for Fairmount. We had a bunch of zones along that short route, and we worked to get those zones eliminated. We still have one really high zone other than the core loan zone, which is the 1A zone. We have zone 2 on the Fairmount line, and that is people have to pay over $7 to get on that train. So we have worked, some of the ways that we got some of these things done, what I would say by any means necessary, is going straight to the top. Our T-Riders Union members go to the board meetings, either virtually or in person, currently virtually, and testify and advocate for things like the free fares or the low-income fare pilots, and also to participate in the planning process. So we're not also at ACE, we're not afraid to use legal action challenging the MBTA on Title VI violations and things like when they eliminated the late night service and left people literally at work sleeping on their jobs because they couldn't get home from work. We got that permanent as of 2020. But then COVID broke out, and so then they cut the service and cut out buses and things like that. So we're still working on that. I'm not sure how much time I have left here. Some of the other things we participate in are street design, BRT, and looking at ways to fix. But I call this deruralizing urban transit. We believe that. Public transportation is a public good, and it should be ubiquitous. We have some lines within the city of Boston that don't run on Sunday. They're very densely populated, and there's a lot of development going on along this line, like the 14 bus route. And that particular bus route doesn't run after like 8 o'clock at night. So people who live along that route are forced to use other means to get around, and there's nothing for at least a mile and a half and along that route in many areas of that particular route. So we're working to fix the issues with bus routes like the 14 bus. Currently, we have a campaign called Fix the 14. So those are some of the things that we have, some of the ways that we have advocated organizing from the community, developing outlines like the Fairmount line and getting that up and running, utilizing focus groups, having face-to-face meetings with our transit officials, bringing them into the community with transit talks, things like that. And also we have gone to our state and municipal elected officials and our city officials working on planning processes and also organizing them so that they can be active participants in what's going on in our communities and making sure that these transit issues are addressed and that they are changed systematically by creating laws and bills and things like that to get those things moving along the way. So that has been my synopsis of over 20 plus years of advocacy and working to address development without displacement and things like that in our public transit system. And it does affect folks in Rhode Island, and we're hoping that you can use some of our best practices to implement to affect change within our transit systems that are all interconnected.
Mela, wow. Thank you for advocating by any means necessary to ensure that transit is both affordable and accessible to all. The Fairmount line is a topic we could spend an entire afternoon talking on. I personally have seen the challenge with adding stops to support the lower income individuals who live closer to downtown and not just supporting those who live in the suburbs. In addition to the increased cost in developing that area, affordable housing and mixed use housing has also been questionable, if not a failure. So I appreciate your efforts there. The low-income fare pass that you mentioned and free busing, as we consider it in Rhode Island, is a topic of discussion for the new Rhode Island Transit Master Plan. I'd like to pose a question to Greg, and then we'll ask questions of the other panelists. But recognizing that we have about 15 minutes left, I'd love it if you could try to limit your answers to 2 minutes or so. The first question for Greg: the topic of free fares for RIPTA service has been introduced again this year in a recently filed Senate bill. Since the onset of COVID, transit agencies in other states have been experimenting, as we just heard, with fully implementing free service. What have you learned from their experiences to inform decision-making about this in Rhode Island?
Yeah, so it's free fares are a complicated topic. I think the intention behind free fares, in my opinion, is that people are trying to increase access for people who can't necessarily afford transit. which is a really admirable goal. And what we've seen in other communities that have tried implementing free fares is that it does come at a cost to a transit agency, because transit agencies do rely on revenue to some degree or fare box revenue to subsidize operations. What we've learned in our experience is that our passengers in Rhode Island, and we actually asked this question explicitly throughout the transit master plan development, is that people want to see investments in transit that will actually enable them to, go out late at night, go out on the weekends, get to where they need to go, not have to wait an hour and a half for a bus. And that was actually far more important to them than necessarily receiving free transit. It's something that we support conceptually, as long as the funding is there to support it. But the reality is that from our perspective, that we want to make investments in our system to make our system more accessible at all times. Rhode Island already has a very robust free fare program in place. We actually have 1 in 4 riders today that actually ride our system for free. That is targeting low income individuals, and we would love the opportunity to grow that program if the funding supported it. But we do want to invest in where we can see the biggest gains in ridership and really making our system more functional. We actually have had some experience in the state with free fares to some degree, and making service improvements. We actually operate a route right now, the Quonset Express, that operates entirely free to passengers on that route. And the intention there was that this will make this service more attractive and get people riding those buses. And the reality is the ridership has just not demonstrated that. And so, we are providing a service that is free, and arguably it's not a great service. And that kind of is the underlying issue, that if the service isn't there and it's not a quality service, it's not going to be something that people want to ride regardless of the fare. Meanwhile, on Route 72, which connects Pawtucket down to Providence from the west, that route we actually we doubled service on that route back in prior to the pandemic, and within a month of us doubling that service, we saw a ridership increase of almost 50% on that route, without any marketing to support that. Unfortunately, COVID hit a month later, and so the ridership bottomed out. But in that 1 month that we doubled that service, we did see a huge increase in ridership. So.
Thank you, Greg. I'd love to tease that out at some other time, because I think there are some things, and marketing and advertising certainly play a role, but also connecting that opportunity for transportation to the workforce and the employer base to make sure that it's actually a fit for the jobs that are on either end of the transit route. My next question is actually going to be posed to the full panel. Gentrification and displacement issues around transit-oriented development and every other type of transit development have been of concern based on our viewers. This question comes from our viewers. So my question to the panel is, and I'm going to start with Dwayne, particularly since you mentioned impact study, how do we ensure that, one, as we design transit systems that better support our communities, that we're not causing gentrification or displacement to happen in our neighborhoods?
So it goes back to what I said with the impact assessment. And this is not some real long, drawn out process or concern. It really is common sense. It's okay, if we do this, what's going to go right? What's going to go wrong? Is this going to cause that situation? I don't think the issue is, oh my God, how do we prevent it? Is this project so harmful that we want to move forward with it? So, like I said in my statement, if it's going to cause that creation, don't do it. Find some other way to mitigate those factors, adjust, retitle, reorganize, and make it work where it does benefit everybody. If it doesn't, do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Do not go any further with the idea. You stop and you find another way to do it. And I mean, it is very simple. There's no long drawn out process on that.
Thank you, Dwayne. I want to pass the question over to Sue.
Yeah, thank you, Dwayne. We had a lot of conversations about this working on the Pawtucket Central Falls Transit Center. And I will say, we worked on this project, spend a lot of, the limited resources of the city of Pawtucket for probably over 20 years. And, the mayor would not have had us do that if we didn't believe, and if we all didn't believe that the, investment of both commuter rail and bus hub transit access at this location would not benefit the residents of Pawtucket. So I wish that I had a map because I wanted to kind of show you what's going on around the station, because I think that that context is really important here, because there are some really dense neighborhoods in both Pawtucket and Central Falls that are within walking distance, and I think that everyone's paying attention to sort of what could happen to those neighborhoods. But there's also, I think, at the time that I left, there was about just under 1 million square feet of vacant industrial buildings. So there's a huge opportunity for investment and redevelopment without any displacement. There's a lot of opportunity for new development to come in and to renovate those buildings, or tear them down and build new. Like, there's a lot of space out there where there's not a lot of there's no residents at all, there's no development at all, and that's I think part of why we were looking at this is an opportunity to help some breathe some life into these vacant industrial spaces. Now, I don't want to be naive and say that there's going to be no impacts to the neighborhoods. But I think another factor that we had been working on for over 20 years in those neighborhoods was working with our local partner, Pawtucket Central Falls Development, to increase home ownership in those neighborhoods, even before the idea of this transit center was sort of even thought about. So I think that increasing home ownership is something that can be a bulwark against sort of the effects of gentrification and displacement. And so that leaves us with the renters, and that's absolutely a concern about making sure that whatever investments that is made by the city, by the state, benefits the people who live there. And I think you can see this right in the presentation that Mr. Coes had before us. They're putting $5 million towards connecting affordable housing to transit. I think that everyone sort of is recognizing that that walkable access to transit reduces transportation costs by significantly. It opens up access to labor markets that weren't there, and it opens up access to education opportunities that maybe weren't there before. So there's some opportunities there. That being said, we did want to try and be creative about we talked about I just heard Greg talk about the free transit fare, but we thought about what if you made access to the commuter rail free to residents of the neighborhood for the first year, just so that the people who are living there now would understand that this is a resource for them, and be comfortable with using it. And so we did talk a lot about that. I think that it is an issue. I don't think it's going to be an issue that happens very quickly, but I know the city of Pawtucket is very, very much paying attention to it, and trying to use some of the things that it's doing already, and also working with neighborhood partners on programs to help really make that connection so the residents do benefit from that.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm also aware that the Pawtucket City Council rebuked the idea of incorporating additional affordable housing into the on-site development. So I think there's a lot of work to continue to do there to ensure that as we work to make sure that the transit is made available to the people who live in the neighborhood, that, again, we're not displacing or causing gentrification, which ultimately, after the year of free transit is up, it may have significant impacts on those who rent and own in the neighborhood. So I want to pass the question quickly to Mela, and you can speak to your experience around the Fairmount line or any other transit-oriented development, but how do we ensure that we're not causing gentrification or displacement as we work to improve transportation systems for the people?
Well, the fourth station that was developed on the opened on the Fairmount line was held up for 6 years by community opposition. And some of the fears were, first it was NIMBY, not in my backyard, literally, because they lived right along the right of way, and their backyards abutted that. But there weren't that many people who were doing that, but the group did fight against the stop being opened. Some of the other things that we looked at along the Fairmount corridor specifically is to make this an anti-displacement zone and to put special protections in that along that corridor to help to stop the displacement. Some of the community development corporations, we have three that are operate within along the corridor, specifically Southwest Boston, CDC, Dorchester Bay, EDC, Common Square Neighborhood Development. And we work together within the Fairmont Indigo Transit Coalition to they work to purchase some of the land there to stop speculative developers from coming in and grabbing land and just doing unfettered development. That was one of the things that we worked to do. The other special protections had to do with creating an overlay district, rewriting the zoning code, and saying we can put these special, creating an overlay district along the corridor. There was a TOD zone that expanded out a half mile around all of the stops so that within those areas there would be first source hiring, because we feel that, you know, one of the things is the income levels along that corridor around $39,000, $40,000 max on average. And when you have lower income like that, it's hard to maintain your ability to pay the rents, because people, even who didn't have to raise rents, were raising rents just because they could, to put more money in their pocket. And they said they didn't have to, but they did. We also gave folks the opportunity to look at a tax break for homeowners who did not want to raise their rents, but because of their home values going up, their tax assessments were made higher, and then they had to pay more taxes. So they would pass that along to their tenants. So we looked at putting together some of those things, and also to expand access to jobs with some of our coalition partners. Have a Boston Jobs Coalition to get higher paying jobs for residents within the city of Boston that would actually help them to be able to pay the rent, increase their income levels, and that would actually help to stabilize folks along these corridors who were being, you know, at risk of displacement as well. And then we have a bunch of other things. Our current mayor is all for rent control, and also not having fare increases, that we work with the MBTA not to increase the fares along, you know, within the MBTA specifically. And the last thing I'll say is around the free fares, there's a cost to fare collection around maintaining, counting money, security, and everything. And when you stop having to collect those fares, you speed up the service. You don't have to pay for all of that extra cost that's affiliated with the fare collection. And so there's a way to reduce those costs and to be able to find new ways to fund fare-free transit.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank all the panelists. I think each of you brought something to the table that will give us food for thought for a time to come. And it's been my pleasure working with you in this capacity. I look forward to connecting again on future transit-oriented topics. I'd like to turn this back over to Scott and thank all of you for listening with us.
Kyle, thank you so much. And panelists, thank you. This was a really robust, rich, practical, as well as visionary discussion. I think a lot of good common sense best practices you shared with us. I think gave us a window into kind of the messy but critical process of turning some of these visions and projects into workable, equitable enterprises. And it's not easy, but it's important work. And we look forward to continuing to work with you, Kyle, and all the panelists to make sure we have equitable transportation development, not just transportation development. I also want to thank at this point the other speakers, presenters for this session. I think we've really got a lot of useful information at a critical time in Rhode Island's transportation and economic and housing evolution, a lot to digest, a lot to act on, to strategize around. I'm pumped, and I hope you folks are. I hope you're energized. I hope you're encouraged. I think this is it's a little cliche-ish what I'm about to say, but we've got a real critical moment that we should seize. A moment when we can achieve a much more user-friendly, a much more equitable, and a much more economically catalytic public transportation system. And I think we have to appeal not only to people's altruism to achieve our vision, but also their enlightened self-interest. And we've got really a good argument to make that in appealing to people's enlightened self-interest, because stronger transit does mean stronger economic opportunities. It means improved public health. It means a more walkable, safer neighborhood environment. And it means a cleaner air and more climate resiliency. So when you're looking at public policy issues to focus on and prioritize, given some of the challenges and many of the challenges we have in Rhode Island, I don't think there is a more important one to prioritize than transit. And we've got some new dollars and some new leadership to really make significant strides. But we have a big job ahead of us as advocates and as engaged residents of Rhode Island. We need to push hard for major transformative investments in existing transit service, the kind that Greg outlined, but also in development of new services, which are also part of the Transit Master Plan, and the creation of a more seamless and user-friendly system that expands economic and housing opportunities for all Rhode Islanders, especially those who are struggling daily to achieve basic economic security and human dignity. So all of us who share this vision, and I suspect that most of the people viewing today's session do share it, we need to be doing a number of things to the extent we have the time and the wherewithal. We need to be watchdogging the relevant government decision-making agencies. We need to show up at key public meetings. We need to engage the media in our efforts, which we at Grow Smart Rhode Island have found has been a great way to shift the focus of Rhode Island decision makers on the multi-hub, what we consider a very flawed multi-hub plan, into a much more constructive and transit-friendly alternative. And we need to also train grassroots activists to help them shape their neighborhoods' transit, housing, and economic futures. And really, one key point I want to make in closing is it's past time. It's past time to mainstream transit and to mainstream transit riders. It's past time to mainstream bike and ped infrastructure and to mainstream bicyclists and pedestrians. All of these activities and all of these folks are worthy of respect, they're worthy of investment, and they should no longer be marginalized. We deserve a complete, inclusive transportation policy that treats all users of our transportation system with respect and provides them all, at least figuratively, with a seat at the decision-making table. And this is not only the right thing to do, but it is the smart thing to do. So I want to thank you all for being part of this critical movement and moment. We invite you to stay engaged, to become an advocate, if you aren't already, and to support the work of Grow Smart Rhode Island. And to that end, please consider doing one or more of the following. Reach out to us through our website. Help us in our soon-to-be launched program of paid training for members of community organizing groups such as health equity zones and neighborhood associations. This training initiative will offer tools and know-how for these grassroots activists to help them be more effective advocates for improved transit at the local level. You can also consider helping us achieve one or more of our policy reform priorities that I alluded to at the beginning of our session. You can do that through community outreach, through community organizing, through coalition building, and through education of our public officials. Also, keep an eye out for our big biennial convening on smart growth issues known as our Power of Place Summit. That's tentatively scheduled for Friday, May 6, 2022 at the Rhode Island Convention Center. Hopefully by that time, we will be past this latest surge and it will be safe to gather in large numbers. In connection with the Power of Play Summit, please explore the sponsorship opportunities that will be available for this signature Grow Smart Rhode Island event. And as I mentioned earlier, if you liked what you heard today, please support our talented staff at Grow Smart Rhode Island and our dynamic initiatives by making a tax-deductible contribution today or sometime in the near future to Grow Smart Rhode Island. And thank you all for joining us this morning, for being part of an effort to help Rhode Island and all its residents achieve our full potential. And last but certainly not least, happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day this coming Monday. Be well, keep plugging, be vigilant, and let's seize the moment. Thank you all.